Lord of Mysteries, Incarnation of Chaos by author Yu Shang Wu Wang Chuan. Chapter 451-475. Chapter 451, George III and the Guillotine. Can't I? Xiao Amon smiled, looking at him. The royal family won't allow such a thing, you. Heluer's father's words were cut off again by Xiao Amon before he could finish. Xiao Amon said seriously, but the royal family will be gone soon. What? Heluer's father revealed a shocked and bewildered expression. Sigh, it's too troublesome to explain, so I won't explain it to you individually. Anyway, you'll know everything you need to know during the later ideological education classes. Xiao Amon smiled, then looked at the warrior standing by, waiting, and said, take them to the detention area. These were people from City of Silver, transferred this time to assist Xiao Amon in suppressing all unrest in Backland. Understood, Mr. Xiao Amon. The City of Silver warrior immediately nodded. Standing over 2 meters tall, he was like a mountain. He looked at Heluer's family and said expressionlessly, everyone, please follow me. I don't want to fight you, but I also don't mind fighting you. Heluer's father looked at the City of Silver warrior warily. Thinking of the superhuman strength the other party had just displayed, he ultimately did not resist further. After a few seconds of silence, he asked, will you kill us? Although he wasn't entirely clear about what had happened, he could guess that someone might have rebelled. Such things were not uncommon. Since the establishment of the Luan Kingdom, there had been rebellions or uprisings in various places, but they had mostly been suppressed. However, this rebellion was clearly extraordinary. We are not bloodthirsty people. If you haven't committed a capital crime, of course, you won't die. Xiao Amon responded with a smile, then no longer paid attention to Heluer's family. Instead, he took out a list and looked at the next family. At the same time, another City of Silver warrior began to cordon off the scene. The property here would later be inventoried by specialized personnel, and if Heluer's family had committed crimes, corresponding personnel would also search for evidence. While great changes were occurring in Backland, in the border city, Medici had already assembled his army. He stood on a high platform, his sharp red eyes looking down at the uprising army in neat uniforms below. These young men and women, who had been ordinary people just a few months ago, after several months of training, could not be said to have strong combat power now, but at least they had achieved strict discipline. At this moment, the square was packed with people, but no one spoke or made any small movements. Very good. Medici's lips finally curved into a smile. He raised a wanton grin, then reached out and pulled out the flag beside him, engraved with a sickle and hammer. This flag was personally designed by Roland, said to represent freedom and equality. Medici raised the flag, his voice not loud, but it echoed in everyone's ears. Now, let us go and change this world, let fairness and justice descend upon every corner of the world. You may die, but the name of every person who sacrifices will be etched on the monument of history. You will not die in vain, you will pave the way for a new world for future generations, a world of light. Tell me, are you afraid? No. Everyone spoke in unison at this moment, their voices firm, carrying an indomitable courage. They certainly knew they might die, but they were not afraid. They were only afraid of dying meaningless deaths, afraid of dying like straw. On December 31, 1349, with several border cities as starting points, the sparks officially ignited, and with lightning speed, they set the entire Luan kingdom ablaze. Nearly half of Luan fell in the blink of an eye, occupied by the uprising army. This was not surprising, as they had the support of several churches, the sealed artifacts of the door pathway aided by Abraham, and Medici, a genuine war angel. How could Luan possibly resist now? Ultimately, if it weren't for the sake of thorough reform, with their configuration, it wouldn't have been difficult to directly kick out Augustus and become king themselves. And while some generals stationed in Luan military areas were still struggling, waiting for rescue from Backland, they only received news that would shock the entire world. Backland has fallen, Luan King George III has been captured and will be tried in a few days, possibly publicly beheaded. The fall of Backland undoubtedly caused many who were still struggling to collapse emotionally. And while the nobles and wealthy were in fearful disarray, and the common people were at a loss, news that deities stood behind the uprising army also spread throughout the world. The Lord of Chaos, the Sun God, and Fool also became household names thereafter. At the same time, the three great churches also played their role in the realm of faith, causing many believers who were wavering between the uprising army and the Luan military to choose the former. Under such circumstances, it was only natural for the uprising army to take over the remaining half of the Luan kingdom. Thus, in just one short month, Luan completely changed its name. And George III, after his trial, met his day of beheading. Extra. George III to the guillotine. The rule of Augustus comes to an end. On the streets, the voices of newsboys occasionally rang out. Although Luan had undergone a major change, under Roland's deliberate maintenance, order naturally did not collapse. Although most people were either taken for ideological guidance classes in a daze, or pulled into vocational training, mainly to learn a skill and live a life with food and drink, or simply didn't know what was happening, only that the kings seemed to be gone, the general order was still maintained. Entities like newspaper offices, under Roland's instruction, even worked overtime to produce daily news, primarily to occupy the high ground of public opinion. The real trouble begins now. Roland closed the window, thought about the upcoming workload, and couldn't help but shake his head. Overthrowing a king was simple, especially when military strength was up to par, but establishing a new order after the overthrow was not so simple. And once the situation in Luan stabilized, reforms targeting other countries would also be time to launch. Not launching them now was mainly due to limited manpower. It was conceivable that this would undoubtedly be a very busy period. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about this. Roland smiled. Different professions have their specializations. He had completed his part. The rest, of course, would be handed over to professionals. However, it might not even wait until Luan stabilizes. Thinking of certain reactions from Intis and Fossa after the revolution broke out, Roland narrowed his eyes, not particularly worried. Intis has eternal blazing sun and steam base. If they dared to start a war, they would only be waiting to be backstabbed by the two great churches, unable to stir up any waves. Fossa was a bit troublesome, as it was a one-man show of the god of war there, but no matter how troublesome, it was still just one god of war. Given the prior agreement with the Evernight goddess, if the god of war truly prepared to do something, Roland truly wouldn't mind helping the Evernight goddess get rid of the god of war before anything happened. All in all, no big problem. Roland smiled. In a good mood, he walked to the study on the second floor and began to prepare the Time Rememberer potion for Sequence 3 for himself. He had already digested the Joy Believer potion, and the ritual for advancing to Sequence 3 was completed after the revolution began. The auxiliary materials had also been prepared long ago. Now was the time to officially advance to Sequence 3. After all, Little K has already officially become a trickmaster. I can't possibly advance slower than him, can I? Roland smiled and began to prepare the potion for himself. Chapter 452, Save File and Time Amber. What kind of potion is the Time Rememberer potion? Simply put, it's a miniature version of the River of History. Roland held up the beaker in front of him, admiring the potion within, which had a blue base shimmering with countless silver starlight. Each flicker of starlight reflected a scene, a moment from the 1,000 years of history Roland had collected. Taste aside, its appearance must be one of the best among potions, Roland muttered with a sigh. Without hesitation, he tilted his head back and drank the Time Rememberer potion. The potion was intensely bitter upon entry, so much so that Roland almost spat it out. But after Roland, with his strong will, primarily forged by drinking various strange vegetable juices, swallowed the potion, he felt a light, floating sensation. His soul seemed to detach from his body at that moment, floating upwards. This wasn't merely an upward movement in space, it was accompanied by another subtle change, until this ascent stopped upon reaching a certain height. What new trick is this? Roland was slightly puzzled. During his previous potion advancements, he had already experienced emotional stripping, body fraud, re-entering the void, and so on. Even his memories had fully recovered during the last advancement, so he was genuinely curious about what this advancement would entail. The next second, Roland felt a change. His soul plummeted downwards, landing on the ground again, but what he saw was not familiar people and things, but entirely unfamiliar land. This was not Roland's current era, nor the relatively familiar Old World civilization era, but much earlier, before humanity was even born. Roland paused, then realized what he was about to face this time. Sure enough, in the time that followed, Roland, in a soul-like state, witnessed various changes on Earth. He witnessed the birth of humanity, how humans fought their way out among all living things, and how humans established and then saw the demise of various dynasties. In his soul state, he could not interfere with anything, he could only witness everything happening. And during this process, at least from Roland's perspective, time did not accelerate. Such a long period, perhaps nothing to Nyarlathotep, but for the mind of a human, it was enough to completely wear down his emotions and memories. Roland could feel some things gradually fading away during these long years. He became increasingly indifferent, increasingly closer to his former self. The human part became incredibly fragile in the face of the long years, while the Nyarlathotep part gradually took over. Roland was not alarmed by this, he no longer had much alarm. He simply watched the changing things quietly until the familiar era arrived, until the people he knew reappeared before him. And with the arrival of that history, Roland finally changed at that moment. His mind seemed to fall into that history. He was no longer a mere bystander but became a participant, experiencing everything alongside his familiar friends. This might have just been an illusion, or perhaps a truly miraculous occurrence. Roland's emotions and memories, worn away by time, gradually revived during this process. When Roland emerged from that thousand-year history as if waking from a dream, he felt something else, the marks he had left in this era, the imprints brought by the transformative events, the interwoven love and hatred of countless people for him, their impressions of him, and his essence etched by time. Roland blinked, and the human part of him was once again completed. Roland opened his eyes. Phew, that was close. Nyarlathotep is too insidious, isn't she? As expected, you can't underestimate any Nyarlathotep, even one I've already consumed. Roland patted his chest with lingering fear. He had genuinely almost fallen for it just now. Fortunately, Brother Yogg was truly powerful, the potion formula and ritual he provided truly had their logic. Roland then pulled out a pocket watch to check the time, only to find that although he felt like countless years had passed during his recent experience, only a few minutes had actually gone by in reality. Roland raised an eyebrow, not surprised by this result. He then unhurriedly brewed himself a cup of black tea, and after taking a sip to calm his nerves, he began to assess the abilities of the Time Rememberer. The changes the Time Rememberer brought to Roland first and foremost were naturally spiritual enhancement, followed by the strengthening of all his previously possessed abilities. For example, the requirements for Rule Oddity were lowered, and Dice of Joy gained an extra re-roll chance per day, and so on. Finally, there were the core abilities of Time Rememberer. This part is quite simple and can be summarized into two parts. The first is called Memory of Time, which can record the state of a person or object, similar to a save file. After use, it can restore the state of that person or object to the state at the time of recording. The second is called Time Amber. Its effect is to seal a person or object in a certain state, which is essentially a sealing technique. However, it is worth noting that people or objects in the sealed state will not suffer any harm. So, from another perspective, this can actually be considered a protective skill. Most importantly, both of the above abilities can affect Sequence 0 beings, but not existences above Sequence 0. They also have a limit on the number of uses and an upper limit on the number of targets that can be affected simultaneously. Save file and time stop in some sense, no wonder it's called Time Rememberer. Roland mused, stroking his chin, quite satisfied with his new abilities. Abilities related to time are never weak. The save file skill, needless to say, although not true time reversal, is very useful whether for providing insurance to allies or for use against enemies. Time Amber is a very strong sealing skill, primarily focused on hard control. It can also be used as a life-saving measure for allies. The only regret is that it can't be used on old ones, but just because it can't be used now doesn't mean it can't be used later. Roland narrowed his eyes, thinking of the throng of outer gods outside the Earth's barrier. He had promised Lilith he would kill the mother goddess of depravity, and he was confident he could do it after advancing to an old one. However, Roland had never forgotten the Mother Goddess of Depravity's peculiarity. As the third pillar, the Mother Goddess not only possessed the characteristic of immortality but was also closely linked to the real world. If she were truly killed, Roland wasn't sure if he could resolve the problems her demise would bring to this world. Now, the existence of Time Amber undoubtedly gave Roland a second option. He could completely wait until the Time Amber skill was strengthened to be usable on old ones, then seal the Mother Goddess. This way, whether he later found a way for Lilith to devour the Mother Goddess and take her place, or found a method to quell the impact of the Mother Goddess's demise on reality before killing her, or simply kept her sealed as an amber forever, all were viable paths. Chapter 453, The Promotion Requirements of a Fabricator. Theoretically, once the Time Amber can seal old ones, I can even hard control those outer deities and delay the apocalypse for countless years, Roland quipped, finishing his cup of black tea, and began to focus on the digestion of the Time Rememberer potion. The difficulty of digesting such a powerful potion was naturally not low, but Roland found that his Time Rememberer potion had already been more than half digested. Why is this? Time Rememberer, Roland fell into thought. Judging from the name and the potion's abilities, the focus of Time Rememberer is clearly on time. Is it related to recording time, restoring history, and replaying past events? Roland blinked. If the key to digesting the Time Rememberer potion was truly to restore people or objects to a certain past state, or to make certain historical events reappear, then it was not surprising that his potion was more than half digested. After all, with his help, Medici returned to his position as War Angel. The true creator's state was increasingly approaching that of Sorcerer. Adam evolved into Adam 3.0, Ask merged with his other half-soul. The list of such events was simply endless. Under these circumstances, the only reason Roland didn't instantly assimilate was because the digestion difficulty of the Time Rememberer potion was truly immense. If this is true, once the Order of the Old Ones reappears in this world, my Time Rememberer potion might be fully digested. Roland had a plan in mind and couldn't help but curve his lips slightly. Then, he turned his attention to the auxiliary materials and promotion ritual for the Sequence 2 Fabricator potion. The auxiliary materials for the Fabricator potion are the Mind Crystal of non-existent beings and Theosul Shadow of those who existed but were erased. Roland showed Osubway, old man, phone, expression, his brain rapidly spinning at that moment. Non-existent beings, does that refer to people like Adam? Or rather, Angel of Imagination. As for Mind Crystal, I remember this thing, it's essentially a crystallization of emotions and memories. Roland analyzed the auxiliary materials for Time Rememberer. Those who existed but were erased, doesn't that refer to beings like the Sun God, and Soul Shadow? I remember now, this thing is actually the imprint of a soul on history. Peeling off this thing doesn't seem to affect the person involved, but it's particularly troublesome to peel off. Honestly, these auxiliary materials are getting more and more abstract. Roland couldn't help but complain, then went to look at the Fabricator's promotion ritual. The Fabricator's promotion ritual was very simple and could be summarized in one sentence: kill a certain Sequence 0 and erase most of his traces, making him a false existence. Or help someone become a Sequence 0, fabricate a false past, and make at least 1 million people believe it. Such a simple and crude ritual, I like it. Roland blinked. Although he didn't quite understand the meaning of this ritual, considering the effects of the previous rituals, it clearly held deep meaning. And for Roland, whether it was killing a Sequence 0 or helping someone become a Sequence 0, these were both things he would inevitably do at present. After all, he needed to help the Evernight goddess kill the god of war and had been pushing Medici to become a god. Although Medici's god ascension ritual had not yet been completed, it would no longer be a problem once countries like Intis were dealt with. As for the latter part of the ritual, which required erasing traces and fabricating a past, that was even less of a problem for Roland. At this rate, I probably won't be long before I can be promoted to Fabricator, and after Fabricator, Sequence 1 Son of Chaos. Roland's expression became a little strange. I won't instantly assimilate, will I? Roland was still very self-aware. Nyarlathotep was chaos, and as Little Naya, he was, in a sense, a genuine son of chaos. Perhaps I'll be like Little K, directly ascending to an old one after being promoted to Sequence 1. Roland pinched his chin, not particularly surprised by this. For ordinary people, perhaps the initial sequence promotions are simple, becoming more difficult the further one goes. But for beings like Roland, it was the exact opposite. The early promotions were more difficult because Roland had not yet clarified his essence, but after Roland was promoted to sequence 4 and remembered everything, the later promotions became effortless, because the further down the sequence, the more it aligned with Roland's essence's Nyarlathotep. But this did not mean Roland could let his guard down. Just like the long journey through time during the promotion to Time Rememberer, which was enough to erode one's humanity, the closer he got to Nyarlathotep's essence, the closer he got to madness. For Roland, the greater the possibility of his humanity being eroded, the more he risked turning into Nyarlathotep again if he wasn't careful. Fortunately, Brother Yog is reliable, so there shouldn't be much of a problem. Roland muttered to himself and left the study. As soon as he went downstairs, he saw Medici walking towards him. "What's wrong, Medici?" Roland looked at Medici, whose expression was slightly strange, and couldn't help but show a puzzled look. "I just had a dream." Medici didn't try to be mysterious and said directly, "In the dream, you suddenly appeared when I was being hunted by Tudor, helped me kill Tudor, beat Amon, and even hung Adam up and beat him, and then we ate a hot pot together. Do you know what this is about?" Roland blinked. He certainly knew what Medici was describing. It was what he had done in that 1,000-year memory when he had just been promoted to Time Rememberer. Roland didn't intend to hide it. He nodded and said, "I just experienced a rather special illusion. It should be an illusion." At this point, Roland looked at Medici with interest and confirmed, "This experience shouldn't have caused any actual changes to you, right?" "No, it was just a dream." Medici shook his head. He had indeed only had a dream, a strange and jumbled dream. And after waking up, his past memories were still as usual. His former self still died in that underground mausoleum. It was just that, probably because of this jumbled dream, when Medici now recalled that event, his last remaining traces of unwillingness and dissatisfaction had vanished, replaced by a subtle sense of anticipation and eagerness. Medici admitted that he somewhat wanted to hang Adam on a lamppost, just like in the dream. "Then let's go hang him on a lamppost." Roland naturally saw what Medici was thinking. He almost unhesitatingly egged him on. "Although he's 3 in -1 now, he hasn't been promoted to sequence 0 yet, has he? And Little Red, with Xiao Zai, you might not necessarily lose to him." The bonus brought by the uniqueness was terrifying, even an incomplete uniqueness. Medici paused. He glanced at the lazy kitten perched on his shoulder, then curved a wanton smile and said, "That bastard should be at George III's execution site right now. Let's go. Let's catch him." Roland immediately raised his hand and pulled open a spatial door, emphasizing swift and decisive action. Old Era. Chapter 454, The End of an Old Era. Adam had a chaotic dream. He dreamt of certain events that had occurred during the fourth epoch, but unlike his actual experiences, an uninvited guest appeared in the dream, causing many things in the dream to diverge entirely from reality. For example, in a certain hot pot incident, Medici didn't die, and he was hung on a lamppost. What did he do again? Adam raised a hand to rub his slightly aching temples, knowing that the appearance of this dream was certainly not without reason. It was highly probable that someone had done something again. This left Adam feeling a bit helpless, yet also somewhat accustomed to it. After all, ever since Roland arrived in this world, he had caused far too many incidents. Adam would only be unaccustomed if Roland didn't cause trouble one day. Adam merely had a bad premonition, one that compelled him to want to hide in a place no one knew about. But Adam didn't do so. Instead, he looked up at the high platform not far away. On the platform, a guillotine was already poised. The former Loan King, George III, knelt before the guillotine. It was clear he wanted to struggle and escape, but he had long been sealed, able to remain there only like a puppet. Beside George III, someone was reading out his various crimes. Out of consideration for the citizens' literacy levels, the announcer used plain language throughout, ensuring that even illiterate residents could understand what rotten things George III had done. These charges were by no means fabricated, they were indeed all George III's doing. This Black Emperor, put forth by Augustus, was not some soft-hearted fellow. On the contrary, he was utterly despicable. The rotten things he had done, combined, would not be enough even if 10 heads were chopped off. And the citizens who had originally held some expectation and nostalgia for King George III naturally changed their attitudes after hearing these crimes. For a time, public indignation surged, and everyone wished George III would be beheaded immediately. Kill him. Tyrant. Despot. I never imagined he was such a person. Chop off his head. Amidst the indignant shouts of the crowd, George III finally ascended the guillotine. With the fall of the blade, the Augustus family, who had ruled Loan for 1,000 years, met its end. Is it good to watch? A familiar voice sounded beside Adam, and at the same time, a hand rested on his shoulder. Adam was not surprised. He turned his head to glance at Roland and said, "It's very good. How do you plan to deal with the remaining Augustus?" "I thought you knew." Roland glanced at Adam, smiling as he said, "Those who should be judged will be judged, and those who should be released will be released. Augustus is no different to me than any other noble. I won't specifically pardon them, nor will I specifically eradicate them." Roland wasn't afraid of an Augustus restoration. And honestly, rather than hunting down the Augustus and then, many years later, letting ambitious individuals cause trouble in the name of Augustus' descendants, it was better to keep these people under his watchful eye. This way, the legitimacy of Augustus would be in Roland's hands, and others who wished to restore it under the guise of Augustus's legitimacy would have no such claim. Incidentally, a certain prince who fell in love with a witch, along with his beloved witch, were also arrested this time. The former is currently undergoing ideological re-education and, having committed no crimes, will probably be released soon. The latter is atoning, currently hunting members of the demonist sect alongside William I. Roland mused that whether this couple could ultimately end up together was hard to say. After all, without the separation by death from the original work, the prince might still love Trissa, but whether Trissa could realize her feelings for the prince were unusual was hard to tell. From this perspective, another one of the CPs I shipped back then became B. Roland shook his head, sighing over his difficult path of shipping CPs. Adam was clearly not surprised by this outcome. He then chatted with Roland for a few more moments, mainly discussing issues regarding the establishment of a new nation, such as whether it would be an empire or a republic, and whether Loan would change its name, and so on. Roland naturally answered each question. Since he had no interest in being an emperor, the new Loan would naturally be a republic. He would be the top leader, but Saussure would serve as the second leader and the primary handler of government affairs. As for Medici, he would be the republic's general. Loan's name would be changed to the Susha Republic, with no other meaning than to serve as a memorial. In addition, corresponding work such as establishing a government system and talent selection had already been proceeding in an orderly manner. After all, to maintain the normal operation of a country, a corresponding system and many talents are truly needed. Don't ask me about the more specific matters. Saussure and the others are in charge of all of that, including the subsequent implementation of the new order. I don't manage those things. Roland spread his hands, completely giving up. Adam nodded, not surprised by this. His gaze then swept over the slightly languid Medici next to him, and changing the subject, suddenly asked, "So, are you here to beat me up?" "That's right." Roland nodded straightforwardly, looking at Adam with a smile and saying, "So, are you ready to be beaten?" Of course, Adam also showed a smile and said, "No." His figure then vanished. It turned out Adam had already left at some unknown point, leaving behind only an illusion. Roland was not surprised by this either. He just looked at Medici and said, "The hunt has begun." Medici was likewise not surprised by Adam's disappearance. He curled the corner of his mouth and said, "Driving the prey into a trap is an indispensable part of a hunter's hunt." Undoubtedly, this was a hunt targeting Adam. Because Roland and Medici had no intention of hiding, they quickly attracted a large crowd of onlookers. The onlookers included, but were not limited to, Amon, who for some unknown reason came to join the fun, Bethel, who loved to watch a good show, Saussure, who was originally working overtime but was dragged over, Little K's trio, who came along with Saussure to watch the fun, and I understand the logic, but where did you three pop out from again? Roland looked at the three incarnations beside him. The incarnation of Evernight Goddess, completely enveloped in a hood and wearing a veil. The incarnation of God of Steam and Machinery, clearly made of steel, with every inch of its skin shimmering with mechanical brilliance. and the incarnation of Storm Old Dove, whom Roland had never seen before but knew at a glance must be extremely volatile. You were fighting so intensely in the spirit world, we couldn't help but notice. The incarnation of Evernight goddess smiled, her voice gentle. She gazed into the distance, where Medici was fighting intensely with Adam. Amon occasionally interjected, not favoring either of them, but randomly striking one of them. Sometimes he would steal someone's ability, sometimes he would help someone, primarily aiming to cause trouble. Chapter 455, Adam gets beaten up. Bethel quietly stayed by the side, his expression relatively calm, but his eyes shone brightly. He held a notebook in his hand, clearly recording something. As expected, the short story of Medici vs. Adam would soon become another masterpiece by Bethel. As for whether it was 100% true or a fabricated tale with added embellishments, it was hard to say. Saucerier's expression was a bit helpless, but he had no intention of stopping either side. He only occasionally fell into contemplation, most likely thinking about unresolved political matters. This was the true worth of Heavenly Kingdom Vice-Monarch Saucerier. Little K, Xiao Amon, and Jack were completely spectators. Xiao Amon even brought a melon and generously shared a slice with everyone present who was watching the show. Jack, nobody knew where he pulled them from, produced several bags of melon seeds and also shared some with everyone, happily cracking them. Clearly, everyone wanted to see Adam in a pickle. Just then, the incarnation of the god of steam and machinery seemed to sense something. His eyes remained fixed in a certain direction, and sure enough, the figure of Rosal appeared. As soon as he arrived, he precisely locked onto Roland, walked over to Roland's side, and complained, "Boss, such a big show, and you didn't even tell me. What a shame to miss it." Roland glanced at him and chuckled, "Didn't someone already inform you? Why would I need to do something redundant?" Rosal pouted. He naturally heard the other person's teasing. Accustomed to this, he suddenly thought of something, looked at Roland, and asked, "Boss, recently, some very familiar storybooks have suddenly appeared on the market. Do you have any idea about this?" Although Rosal had been mostly immersed in inventing and manufacturing in his mechanical laboratory recently, not even participating much in the reform events, this did not mean he paid no attention to the outside world. It was precisely because of this that Rosal discovered some novels had appeared on the market recently. These novels almost all had one thing in common: the main characters' designs were very familiar, and some plot points in the stories were also very familiar, almost to the point of being explicitly labeled, "This work is based on Rosal and the god of steam and machinery." Of course, as a person with no integrity, Rosal didn't particularly care about such things anyway, since the gender-swapped characters in those stories weren't him, but that didn't stop Rosal from wanting to seek justice for himself. Facing Rosal's questioning, Roland calmly said, "You shouldn't be asking me this question. It wasn't you." Rosal was stunned for a moment, revealing a suspicious expression. "Of course not." Roland shook his head frankly, glanced in the direction of Little K and Xiao Amon, and said, "Look, the culprit is over there." Rosal raised an eyebrow and immediately looked over. Feeling his gaze, Little K almost immediately looked away guiltily. Xiao Amon calmly met his gaze and even raised the melon in his hand, saying, "Want some melon?" Little K felt a little guilty. He certainly knew about the widely circulated stories on the market recently, which were based on Rosal and the god of steam and machinery. But these stories were not actually written at Little K's behest. Although he had indeed been tempted by Jack's suggestion, Little K was a person of integrity, so even if he was tempted, he ultimately didn't do it. However, the appearance of these stories was not entirely unrelated to Little K. The main reason was that after Little K finished eating Rosal's melon, he couldn't resist sharing it with Xiao Amon, and then things turned out this way. A certain Xiao Amon was indeed worthy of being a being who had stood out among many Amons. Although he now possessed humanity and had a bottom line, he was still a master at stirring up trouble. He directly hired 10 writers to start writing, and in a short time, Rosal's stories became popular throughout the North and South continent. By the time Little K discovered this, it was too late to stop it. "I hope Mr. Rosal won't be too angry. Sigh, it's all my fault." Little K sighed, secretly deciding that he would apologize properly to Rosal and the god of steam and machinery later. Although he knew very well that even if he didn't apologize, these two couldn't do anything to him, it was indeed his fault, so he should apologize. Little K was such a person. He was not perfect and had some common human flaws, but he always dared to face the mistakes he made. So when Rosal walked over aggressively, Little K immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rosal, I'm sorry, Mr. God of Steam and Machinery. Spreading your stories without your permission was my mistake, and I deeply regret it." The God of Steam and Machinery was stunned for a moment when he heard this. He was clearly not angry. Instead, he smiled and said, "It's okay, I don't mind." Rosal, however, looked at Little K suspiciously and said, "You had those books written." Although he hadn't spent much time with this junior transmigrator, Rosal had some understanding of Little K's character. The latter didn't seem like the type of person to do such a thing. Little K didn't know how to answer for a moment. Amon, who was beside him, calmly said, "How could it be Little K? Of course, I did it." As he said this, he even asked back very righteously, "Is there a problem?" Rosal looked at Amon, then at Little K, deeply feeling that the gap between people was indeed greater than that between people and dogs, and then said to Amon, "You wait, I'll write your narcissist fanfiction tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm very professional in this area. I'll definitely make your story a legend." If Roland had done this, Rosal would have definitely used it to seek some benefits for himself, such as seeing his parents more, but since it was Amon who did it, it was naturally a case of giving him a taste of his own medicine. "I'm waiting for your story. Remember to show me the first draft when it's done," Amon said with a grin. Clearly, he, like Rosal, had no integrity and didn't care about his own fanfiction. Fight. Roland, who was observing, was quite happy about this, as he loved watching such things. And at this moment, the battle between Medici and Adam finally ended. Because it was a direct combat pathway, and with the bonus of minor disasters, Medici almost without exception won this battle. "How do you plan to deal with me?" Although defeated, Adam's expression was still quite calm. "I told you long ago." Medici smirked. He then somehow produced a lamppost, and in no time, tied Adam up and hung him on the lamppost. Then Medici took out a sign and placed it next to the lamppost. On this sign was written a sentence. "This is a necessary sacrifice. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description." Chapter 456 Storm Old Pigeon and Adam. My time memoir or potion digested a bit because this counts as replicating a famous meme. Roland suddenly raised an eyebrow, feeling his time memoir or potion digest a little more as he looked at Adam, who was hanging on a lamppost not far away. "So, it's just as I guessed. At least one part of the time memoir or potion's digestion focuses on historical reenactment." Roland murmured to himself, pinching his chin, then dismissed the thought. He then curled his lips into a smile and pulled out a camera from who knows where. Click, click, click. Roland unceremoniously snapped a flurry of photos of Adam. He even enthusiastically called out to the others, "Anyone want a group photo? You can come over now, you won't get this chance again." Roland was speaking the truth. Don't let Adam's current docile state, hanging on the lamppost, fool you. It was purely because Adam felt some guilt towards Medici that he was so compliant. Otherwise, if it were anyone else, even if they had truly defeated Adam, he would never have allowed himself to be so obediently hung on a lamppost. "Me. I want one." Little Amon, truly the Amon among Amons, the king among mischievous children, immediately raised his hand first. He even pulled his little companion, Little K, beside him, excitedly saying, "We all want to take one." Little K, who had been dragged into this, lightly coughed. Although he felt a bit embarrassed, he didn't voice any objection. After all, Little K also had a mischievous side. Simply put, he wasn't entirely against a little bit of teasing others. And Adam's current predicament was undoubtedly the result of his own making, so even though he felt a little awkward, he didn't feel any guilt. As for Jack, there was even less to say. As Roland's disguise, he even pulled out several pre-prepared standees. Some of these standees were in the shape of animal heads, with only the middle empty for people to put their heads through for photos. Others had different slogans written on them, such as, "World-famous painting." It was clear at a glance that he had come prepared. "Although I have no grievances with this guy, but, not joining in on the fun is foolish. Rosal laughed heartily, clearly also a joker in training. The god of steam and machinery clearly shared Rosal's attitude. Saussurier showed a hesitant expression. Half a second later, he gave Adam an apologetic smile and said, "I think this is indeed very memorable. You should remember this lesson and never forget humanity." Adam, hanging on the lamppost, looked at Saussurier upon hearing this and calmly said, "I will not forget again, otherwise I would not be hanging here now." The Evernight goddess seemed to smile upon hearing this. She said, "Your changes are truly significant, but to me, the current you is far more reassuring than before." The Evernight goddess had been very wary of the former Adam. This incarnation of the sun god possessed absolute rationality and secretly manipulated many things, especially Adam's scheme to kill Medici, which made the Evernight goddess unable to trust him anymore. Although at that time the Evernight goddess had not yet fully understood Adam's true identity, she at least knew that the other party was the sun god's eldest son, and king of angels who had been watched over by Medici as he grew up. It was precisely because of this that when the Evernight goddess learned that Adam had harmed Medici, she was quite surprised and developed a deep wariness towards this existence. This wariness continued into the fourth epoch, lasting until this very moment. Looking at Adam, who was obediently hanging on the lamppost, a smile flashed in the Evernight goddess's eyes. She didn't know what Roland had done to Adam, but the current Adam was clearly no longer the same Adam who had abandoned his humanity and was absolutely rational. The Lord of Storms quietly gazed at Adam on the lamppost. Regardless of whether he had known Adam's true identity before, he clearly knew it now. This true god of the storm pathway didn't appear as irritable, instead, he seemed somewhat rational and silent, reminding one of an anomaly within the storm pathway, a certain hanged man Alger of the Tarot Club. "Is there anything you want to say to me, Leodoro?" Adam naturally felt the gaze from the storm old dove. He calmly looked at the latter and asked, "You are not him. Although you are moving closer to him, a fake is still a fake." The Lord of Storms Leodoro finally spoke. This deity, who had been silent since his appearance, clearly held a similar view to the eternal blazing sun. He likewise did not acknowledge Adam or the true creator as the sun god. The Lord of Storms was truly devoted to the former sun god, but towards fakes like Adam and the true creator, he only felt disgust. This is normal. It's like a vase that has been shattered, and its fragments are taken and reassembled into a completely different shape. Some people might still consider it the same vase, but others will only find the fake an eyesore. Such familiar words. You are not the first to say this, and perhaps not the last. Adam had clearly anticipated the storm old dove's words. He seemed slightly helpless as he spoke. "However, I can probably understand why you think this way. The gap between me and the former sun god is indeed very large, I do not deny this." Although Adam had always believed that whether it was himself, the true creator, or Saussurier, they were all the sun god, adhering to the belief that sameness of soul meant the same person, he also did not deny that even among themselves, the differences were vast. "This isn't about personality, forget it, you wouldn't understand." The storm old dove clearly intended to say something, but ultimately shook his head, swallowing the words he had begun to speak. Adam clearly understood the Lord of Storms' unspoken words. He had no intention of engaging in such debates about values, as they usually yielded no results. Adam simply said, "Actually, it doesn't matter whether you acknowledge me or not. If the future god is not the sun god, then it will be Saussurier. You wouldn't even reject them." The storm old dove did not refute this. He naturally acknowledged the true sun god, and the storm old dove was not averse to Saussurier, not because the latter was an incarnation of the sun god, but because their past interactions made the storm old dove understand what kind of person Saussurier was and what abilities he possessed. To put it more bluntly, Leodoro was subservient to the sun god and trusted Saussurier, but towards Adam, he felt neither subservience nor trust. "I am very happy that you are still willing to believe me, Leodoro." Saussurier had clearly been listening to their conversation the entire time, and at this moment, he revealed a gentle smile and said, "After many years, the Dark Angel and the Wind Angel finally met again." Chapter 457 Adam feels awkward. Upon hearing Saussurier's words, Leodoro finally turned his gaze towards the former Dark Angel. His movements at this moment clearly became somewhat stiff, carrying a sense of helplessness, as if he didn't know how to act. For any king of angels who once followed the sun god, Dark Angel Sorcerer was a very special existence. This former Heavenly Kingdom vice-monarch often served as the caretaker and guide for many King of Angels. Even after the King of Angels matured, he still looked after everyone like an elder. And for Leodoro, Sorcerer was naturally a very special existence. Leodoro had followed the sun god since he was very young, just like Medici. He could also be considered to have been raised by Sorcerer. However, compared to Medici, who was always a loyal follower of the sun god, Leodoro, due to his past betrayal, was clearly at a loss at this moment. Even if that betrayal was not what he desired, what happened, happened. Leodoro did not intend to defend himself. This also made Leodoro uncharacteristically develop some avoidance psychology, so even though he had long known where Sorcerer was, he never truly contacted him. Like a child who made a mistake, not daring to approach his mother. Leodoro merely quietly paid attention to matters concerning the sun god and Sorcerer, while not forgetting to have the church contribute money and effort, playing a significant role in the reform cause. Compared to words, Leodoro was always more adept at action. Long time no see. Leodoro's tone was noticeably dry. This man, who was so articulate when speaking to Adam, seemed to have forgotten his linguistic function at this moment, struggling for a long time before managing to utter this single sentence. For me, we just met. Sorcerer smiled. He looked at Leodoro, who clearly didn't know what to say, and suddenly reached out to pat his shoulders, the back of his neck, and his back several times. Then, as Leodoro looked at him like a startled cat, he leisurely said, "Your posture just now makes you prone to hunching, which is bad for your cervical spine." Leodoro. He was already a true god, did he still need to care about this? Leodoro was somewhat speechless, but his tense mood relaxed after this small interlude. Some ancient memories he thought he had long forgotten resurfaced at this moment, making Leodoro blurt out, "I remember when I was little, you often adjusted our sitting posture like this. That guy Osius was better at it than me, he could sit still, but it was hard for me to sit as straight as that. He was never a very rigid or serious person, even when sitting, he always made small movements and received a lot of criticism for it back then. Compared to Amon, you were actually much better." Sorcerer also clearly recalled something, sighing with emotion. What kind of severe case was Leodoro? Amon was the one who couldn't sit still at all. To be reduced to comparing myself with Amon, I don't think that's a good thing. Leodoro crossed his arms over his chest. He suddenly revealed a smile, and a certain aura emanated from his entire being. He said, "I won't defend what I did back then, and I don't ask for your forgiveness, but I do owe you." Leodoro then pointed to himself and said, "I know what you want. This uniqueness and characteristic, you can take them whenever you want. If you think that's not enough and want my life to repay what happened back then, that's fine too." If Adam had become the Lord, Leodoro would never have easily offered his characteristic, but if it were the sun god or Sorcerer, Leodoro would not refuse. Sorcerer sighed upon hearing this. He knew that the matter of betrayal was a knot in the hearts of all three gods. Sorcerer looked at Leodoro and said, "I know that what happened back then was not your fault." Leodoro's expression was tense as he said, "But a mistake is a mistake, and those who make mistakes should pay the price for them. You're still so stubborn." Sorcerer seemed somewhat helpless. He gazed at Leodoro, then continued, "All right, then as punishment for your mistake, Leodoro, when I or the sun god ascend to that position, I will take the uniqueness and a sequence one characteristic from you. As for your life, I don't need it, but I hope you can promise me that you will abide by the rules we set and make this world a better place." Sorcerer clearly understood that Leodoro didn't need forgiveness. This somewhat single-minded fellow, in a sense, needed punishment. Only after accepting punishment would he truly let go of that matter. Leodoro visibly relaxed upon hearing Sorcerer's words. He then nodded solemnly and said, "Good. So, are you done talking?" Just then, Roland, who had been silently observing for a long time, finally spoke. He raised the camera in his hand and smiled, saying, "If you're done talking, then it's photo time. Night, old pigeon, do you want a group photo?" Evernight Goddess gently nodded and said, "I wouldn't miss such a memorable moment." Leodoro only realized after half a second that, old pigeon, was referring to him. He clearly didn't quite understand the origin of this nickname but didn't ask, nodding and saying, "I'm already a bit impatient." There was no one among the three gods who didn't want to watch Adam's spectacle. So, naturally, it became a lively photo session. With Adam as the central attraction, Roland took over a dozen sets of photos, each containing dozens of pictures. By the end, even Adam, who had always been very calm, started to feel uncomfortable and couldn't help but ask, "Is that not enough?" "Oh, so you're finally feeling awkward." Roland raised an eyebrow, teasing. A normal person would feel awkward in this situation, wouldn't they? Although my emotions are more detached than a normal person's, they're not absent. Adam spoke very frankly, with a touch of helplessness. Then Adam heard a click. Adam. Good expression, very memorable. Roland smiled, then reached out and patted the lamppost below Adam, saying, "Is there a possibility that I'm doing this just to make you awkward?" Adam. After a second of silence, Adam said, "Can you let me down now?" "Of course not." Roland looked at him in confusion and said matter-of-factly, "How long have you just been hanging on that lamppost?" "At least 9 days and 9 nights. Adam fell silent. His gaze swept over the people currently watching, and then he considered the people who might pass by the spirit world during this time, or the guys who might have just heard the news and rushed over to watch the show. He suddenly felt his scalp tingle. Chapter 458, The New Order. How long Adam had been hanging on the lamppost was an unknown. At any rate, those who should have seen the spectacle had seen it, and even those who shouldn't have seen it had joined in. Everyone was happy about this matter, only an angel of imagination was silently withdrawn. And while Adam was hanging on the lamppost, Loan, now the Republic of Susha, was naturally in full swing with various reconstructions of order. Various departments were rapidly established, and new regulations were swiftly implemented. The entire society underwent changes at an extraordinary speed during this process. As for Old Kohler, he couldn't quite grasp what had been happening in Loan recently. After all, he was a very old man, his mind wasn't as flexible as young people's, and he couldn't quite understand many new regulations and social changes. But this didn't prevent Old Kohler from knowing that after the uprising army overthrew the ruined royal family, his life was now getting better and better. "Good evening, Mr. Old Kohler. Are you off to your evening class?" Freya greeted Old Kohler with a smile. This not-so-old girl was evidently much more cheerful than before, and her clothes had changed from old, much-washed garments to simple yet brand-new school uniforms. Those were school uniforms issued by the recently established, compulsory education, schools. The fabric wasn't expensive, but it was comfortable and durable. Everyone willing to attend school could receive 2 sets, and the school also provided 3 meals for free. Although not luxurious food, it was certainly enough to fill one's stomach. Because of these benefits, many families, even those who hadn't originally planned to send their children to school, enrolled them in these newly established schools. As for the evening class, Freya mentioned, it wasn't offered in the compulsory education schools. The latter primarily targeted students, and considering their health, classes were generally held only during the day, similar to regular schools, but with almost no tuition fees. The evening class was a course at another newly established Skills Academy. This academy primarily targeted adults, with courses available both during the day and at night, allowing people to choose freely. Besides basic literacy courses, the main focus was on cultivating various vocational skills. Depending on the class time, 1 meal was provided, and if one performed well during their time at the school, they could even receive direct recommendations from the school to take up positions in relevant places. The tuition fees were also almost non-existent. It's worth mentioning that both types of schools included a thought education class, designed to correct ingrained old notions and help students better and more quickly adapt to the new society. Old Kohler attended evening classes at the Skills Academy, learning a craft more suitable for the elderly. Because of his excellent performance, he might soon receive a recommendation to directly take up a position in a relevant job. "Good evening, Freya, you look very happy today. Has something good happened?" Old Kohler clearly liked this cheerful young girl, as she reminded him of his own children. "I was praised by the teacher in class today," Freya said, a little shyly. Then she seemed to remember something and looked at Mr. Old Kohler, asking, "Old Kohler, at your age, you could actually just live on relief funds. Why do you still want to find a new job?" Considering that some people are too old to work, the Republic naturally has corresponding assistance policies for the elderly. People who reach a certain age and meet the conditions can receive relief funds. Of course, if you're a young person with all your limbs intact, don't even think about it. The Republic doesn't advocate for freeloaders, it promotes earning more through hard work and supporting oneself. Unemployed adults can go to the Skills Academy to learn a skill for free and receive a period of relief subsidies, but if they are unwilling to work indefinitely, the Republic will not indulge them. After all, this is no longer the Loan of the past where people had ability but no work. The current Republic is severely short of people in all industries, and it is a time of rebuilding from scratch. As long as you are willing to work, you will not starve to death. Old Kohler paused at this, evidently deliberating before saying, although I can live on those relief funds, I'm not incapable of working. How can I really rely on the state to support me? The current king, oh no, the executive officer is so good. Even someone like me can have a decent job. This is something I couldn't even dream of before. I used to be a good worker, so of course, I have to keep working now. Freya listened, half understanding, and nodded, saying, I also think it's very good now. My mother is also taking evening classes recently and will soon get a recommendation. After that, Mom won't have to wash clothes anymore. Although washing clothes isn't bad, the water in winter is really too cold. The two then discussed a few more things, and because Old Kohler was in a hurry for his evening class, they naturally parted ways quickly. Freya went home. She still had some homework to write that evening, while Old Kohler arrived at the Skills Academy. The Skills Academy was very lively at this moment because most people had jobs during the day, many could only attend evening classes, so the academy was most crowded at night. Old Kohler greeted several familiar classmates and sat in a front row seat. Beside him were people of different age groups, most of them middle-aged, and some, like him, were elderly. Soon, school staff came into the classroom. They were not teachers, but brought dinner, distributing it to the students in the classroom. Only after all the students had finished their meals and the utensils had been collected did the instructor arrive. After that came several hours of study. Old Kohler, due to his age, found learning not easy, but he excelled in diligence and perseverance, so his progress was not far behind others. In fact, he was among the more outstanding students. But after class, Old Kohler, a little embarrassed, asked the teacher a few questions he didn't quite understand before returning to his residence, which was also the dormitory for many of his classmates. The Republic provided temporary dormitories for every homeless person. The dormitories were not large, and because they were built in a hurry, they lacked some living facilities, but at least they provided a place for every homeless person to stay. And these people, like Old Kohler, would basically go to the Skills Academy to study every day, but once they got a stable job, they would move out of the temporary dormitories and into the employee dormitories of the factories where they worked. That's right, the skills recommended for study and the jobs recommended at these skills academies are basically from the Republic's newly established companies and factories. These companies and factories generally provide accommodation and 3 meals, and the salaries are decent. Perhaps they can't make people rich, but at least they don't have to worry about food and drink, and their lives are secure. After a simple wash-up, Old Kohler ended his day. Chapter 459. The church was all shaved off. Tisk, it's a good thing this world has Beyonders of the Earth pathway, otherwise, it would be really hard to fill the food gap. Current productivity is too low. Roland sighed, holding the latest report. If you were to ask what the biggest difficulty the Republic encountered in the process of implementing the new order, it wasn't the remnants of the old kingdom causing trouble from time to time, nor was it encountering stubborn individuals when doing ideological work with former nobles, but rather the various shortages of manpower and supplies. Current productivity cannot compare to the civilization of the olden days. Besides other things, there is a real food shortage. With the current population, it's still manageable, as Roland has acquired a lot of food from the old nobles, temporarily able to support the entire republic. However, the population will not remain unchanged. In fact, under the current circumstances, it is conceivable that the population will experience explosive growth in the next few years, and if no other actions are taken, food shortages will almost certainly become inevitable. Fortunately, this world has the miraculous Earth pathway. After Roland repeatedly exploited the Earth Mother, the projected future food production is now barely enough to meet the shortfall. The reason it's barely is that the number of Beyonders is, after all, limited. So when can Frank research new wheat? Roland thought of the Mushroom King, in whom he placed great hopes, and decided to visit the biological laboratory later to take a look. Even if it's just to get some mushrooms first. At least various magical mushrooms can be used for cooking. The Republic is short on everything now, and it really wouldn't mind a few more bizarre things. As long as the mushrooms are confirmed to be harmless. The food problem, actually, doesn't need to be worried about for now. Teachers are truly too scarce. Saussure rubbed his brows as he said this. He had been working overtime for a long time and inevitably felt tired. After implementing compulsory education in vocational schools, the Republic's demand for teachers reached a peak. Although there was support from the Knowledge Church, to be honest, it was still a case of too many wolves and too little meat, a drop in the bucket. There's no choice, training teachers takes time, and not everyone is suitable to be a teacher. We can only make do for now. Roland shook his head, unable to help with this. He had already tried very hard to exploit the Knowledge Church. If he exploited them anymore, he would almost make them bald. But the Knowledge Church only has so many people, and they also have to maintain various daily tasks, so there really isn't much more to exploit. In addition to the shortages in food and teachers, there were naturally shortages in other areas, though relatively less important. However, this did not mean that these shortages did not need to be addressed. Compared to these, don't you think the impending war is more important? Medici offered his opinion. Intis and Fosac are already stirring. After such changes occurred in Loan, as long as the rulers of Intis and Fosac were not fools, it would be impossible for them to ignore everything. It's fine, I've already told Osius and Steam. They will pay attention to Intis's movements, and once they try to do something, they will definitely backstab them in time. Roland poured himself a cup of coffee, took a sip, and said. Fosac is also simple to deal with. The Evernight goddess has long been prepared. Later, we will go and eliminate the god of war. Without the god of war, Fosac will be a tiger without teeth, very easy to take down. Who told you about this? Do you think I don't know these things? Medici rolled his eyes and said, what I mean is that once war breaks out, we will inevitably have to take down these two countries, and even the surrounding small countries. At that time, how big do you think the shortages you just mentioned will be? Roland and Saussure fell silent. Roland suddenly stood up and said, I'm going to the biological laboratory to see Frank's experimental results. See you later. The next second, his figure completely disappeared, running incredibly fast. Medici scoffed at the sight, not at all surprised by someone's act of being a hands-off manager. Rather, it was already quite surprising that Roland would even appear here today to discuss these matters with them. Medici simply looked at Saussure and asked, so what do you think? If the shortage is really large, should we slow down the progress of reforms in the other countries? No, some things must be done in one go. Dragging things out is more likely to cause problems. Saussure rubbed his temples. He then apparently thought for a while, picked up several reports, looked at them again and again, and only then said. Although the shortages in all aspects are significant, the various reserves of Intis and other countries can, to a certain extent, compensate for these shortages. At least there won't be problems in the short term. For the long term, Saussure thought while devising some plans to maximize the utilization of the limited resources at hand. Poor Saussure. In the biological laboratory in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, Roland's figure appeared. He sighed and shook his head, already foreseeing Saussure's daily routine of super overtime in the future. That's why Roland didn't want to bother with these matters. Oh, isn't this our dear Mr. Lucifer? What brings you to the biological laboratory today? A slightly sarcastic voice sounded as Will appeared like a ghost and said. I heard someone caused a big stir a few days ago and took over a dozen sets of commemorative photos, and even the Evernight goddess and the others went to join the fun, but no one came to inform me, this poor snake of fate. Roland fell silent. He just knew he had forgotten something when he hung Adam on the lamppost earlier. However, he then remembered something and said righteously, but I didn't notify anyone else either. They all came on their own after hearing the rumors, and you're not the only one who wasn't invited. Ask wasn't either. Ask had also been incredibly busy recently, constantly helping Saucereer with various affairs, and indeed hadn't gone to join the fun before. HMPH. Will snorted, not knowing if it was dissatisfaction or agreement with Roland's statement. He then asked, "So what are you here for?" "I came to see Frank's research results. You know that the Republic has recently implemented various new policies, and there will be a significant food shortage in the future. We urgently need some substantial and filling things to feed the entire world." Roland didn't hide anything, stating it frankly. Then he casually asked, "So, has Frank had any breakthroughs recently?" As soon as he said this, Will's expression clearly became subtle as he recalled something. Then, he seemed to remember something and said hesitantly, "If it's purely a food problem, that guy actually seems to have researched something, but it doesn't seem to be perfect yet. Of course, I don't know the specific details." Oh. Roland's eyes lit up, and he immediately pulled Will towards Frank's experimental area. Let's go, let's see what surprises the Mushroom King has brought us." Chapter 460 Frank's Amazing Plants. Chapter 460 Frank's Wonderful Plants. When Roland walked into Frank's experimental area, the first thing he saw was a bouncing mushroom. That mushroom was a translucent, white jade color, about half a person's height. Although it didn't have human features, one could sense it was in a state of terror. Behind that mushroom was a group of emerald green cabbage puppies. These cabbage puppies seemed to be hunting the mushroom in front, and Roland could even hear them barking. Mushroom. Just then, the white jade mushroom jumped in front of Roland. The next second, Roland saw the white jade mushroom grow a fist from somewhere. The fist instantly swelled, becoming several times larger than the white jade mushroom in the blink of an eye, and then punched towards Roland. Roland raised an eyebrow at the sight and, with a hint of curiosity, reached out to catch the punch from the white jade mushroom. The force of the punch was not small, probably comparable to a Sequence 8 warrior, but for Roland, such force was naturally negligible. But then something unexpected happened even to Roland. After failing with one punch, the white jade mushroom suddenly split into countless small mushrooms with a bang. These small mushrooms were only about the size of a palm, and each one deftly dodged, trying to bypass Roland and run away. However, before these small mushrooms could escape, the cabbage puppies arrived. These cabbage puppies happily pounced on the small mushrooms, picking them up in their mouths. One dog could even carry several mushrooms, and then most of the cabbage puppies happily turned and ran away. The reason for saying most was that there was still one cabbage puppy that hadn't caught a mushroom. It was clearly a bit disappointed, whimpering twice before perking up again, and then rubbing against Roland's pant leg like a real puppy. "Little one, do you like me very much?" Roland crouched down and tentatively reached out to touch the emerald green little creature. The touch felt similar to a real cabbage, and it was a bit cool. Rumble. Just as Roland was petting the dog, a loud bang came from deep within the laboratory, startling the cabbage puppy Roland was petting. The little dog whimpered and then quickly ran away. Roland didn't mind, only looking curiously in the direction of the explosion. He then stood up and walked towards it, passing many white jade mushrooms and cabbage puppies along the way, as well as some oddly shaped things that looked a bit like vegetables and a bit like animals. Finally, he arrived at a laboratory. This laboratory was entirely planted with mushrooms. One plot of land was covered in mushroom remains, clearly the source of the recent explosion. And Frank was currently squatting before those mushroom remains, his expression thoughtful. Knock, knock, knock. Seeing this, Roland raised his hand and knocked on the laboratory door. Frank instantly snapped out of his contemplation. He looked towards the door, and upon seeing Roland, his eyes lit up. He quickly walked over, opened the door, and said, "Your Highness Lucifer, why have you come?" "I came to check on your experimental progress." Roland smiled, not hiding anything. He said, "Recently, the Republic has had a significant food shortage. I came to see if you have any research results that could solve this problem." Food shortage. Frank was stunned for a moment, then revealed a look of sudden understanding. Although he was absorbed in experiments all day, he wasn't completely ignorant of outside affairs, so he generally guessed what was going on. Then Frank said, "As for food, I actually have some results recently, Your Highness Lucifer. Please come with me this way." Frank led Roland and Will to another experimental field. That field was also entirely planted with mushrooms, a vast expanse of vibrant red, looking very beautiful. Looking at these mushrooms, Roland suddenly thought of a nursery rhyme he had heard before, something about red umbrellas and white stems. Are these? Roland asked tentatively. These mushrooms are new varieties I cultivated after referencing God's Sponsea, Frank spoke with a radiant expression. When mentioning his research results, he was clearly very excited and proud. They have incredibly strong reproductive characteristics and very low energy requirements. With just a little water and sunlight, they can grow very large and numerous. And this type of mushroom has very good receptivity, so after the initial original version, I also improved several special versions. This one tastes like chicken, this one tastes like beef, this one tastes like lamb, this one produces milk. Frank excitedly led Roland and the other person through the laboratory, introducing the red mushrooms that looked indistinguishable from each other. Roland listened quietly. After Frank had introduced all his mushrooms, he asked, did they have any negative effects? The negative effect is their strong reproductive characteristics. Simply put, if you want to use them, you must first kill them with high heat, and one thing is very important. Frank seemed to remember something and emphasized. After eating this mushroom, you absolutely cannot eat fish. Fish meat will react specially with them. Even mushrooms killed by high heat will swell upon contact with fish meat. Roland couldn't help but fall silent as he listened, mainly thinking of the famous, death by fish mushroom, seen in the original work. Suddenly not very keen on eating fish, Roland silently removed a dinner option from his mind, then looked at Frank and asked. I'll remember that. Besides these, are there any other negative effects? No, at least no other negative effects have been discovered so far. As long as they are cooked with high heat and do not come into contact with fish, they are no different from normal mushrooms, Frank shook his head and said. All right. Roland nodded. After thinking for a moment, he pulled out a coin to perform a divination. There was no other meaning, mainly to divine whether these mushrooms were truly harmless. The divination result showed that Frank was telling the truth. Roland breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Frank, smiling. You've been a great help, Frank. These mushrooms are very useful. Although mushrooms cannot replace staple foods, mushrooms of various flavors can undoubtedly play a good role, whether as a dish or as a mood-soothing food. Of course, to further ensure safety, these mushrooms will first be supplied to those undergoing labor reform. Only after confirming that these mushrooms are indeed safe and harmless will they gradually be introduced to other canteens. And to prevent certain tragedies from happening, Roland will not openly sell these mushrooms. He will only arrange for specialized personnel to cook them before supplying them to others. After all, there are always people in this world who won't read instructions. Haven't countless people in the olden days gotten mushroom poisoning and ended up in the hospital? Chapter 461, The Non-Existent. That's good. Frank was clearly happy to be of help. He then scratched his head and said, actually, I've also been researching the hybridization of wheat and fish recently, and I already have some ideas. Roland was silent for a second upon hearing that, but ultimately, he didn't raise any objections. After all, Frank's strength lay in his powerful creativity. As long as the things are edible and harmless, it's fine if they're a bit weird. Roland comforted himself like that in his heart. After finishing his conversation with Frank and having him plant red mushrooms on a large scale in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, Roland didn't rush to leave the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Instead, he went to another place. City of Silver. Compared to before, City of Silver now had far fewer people. A considerable portion of them had already gone to the outside world, and the remaining ones would also be arranged to live in the outside world before long. The reason Roland suddenly came to City of Silver was not for anything else but for Omibella's remains. Omibella was a special name and a special existence. Her specialness lay in Omibella's true identity, in her being the eldest daughter of God and the Mother Nest, and also in her subtle connection with the Mother God. And after Omibella's fate was wrongly stolen, after she was killed by the Sun God, this God, and after Lilith took her place, this specialness was further sublimated. Earth Mother Omibella does not exist, you are indeed a non-existent one. Roland smiled as he looked at the sealed artifact formed from Omibella's remains in his hand. His purpose in coming here was precisely to obtain the auxiliary materials for concocting his fictionalizer potion. It proved his guess was correct. After obtaining this sealed artifact, Roland confirmed that he could obtain what he wanted from her, the mind crystal of the non-existent one. It was not easy to strip this thing from a sealed artifact. Fortunately, after Roland recovered his memories, he mastered various useful small tricks. After spending some time, a translucent crystal appeared in Roland's hand. The crystal was a deep green overall, and inside, there seemed to be faint black resentful energy. That was the resentment generated when Omibella was killed by her father, although strictly speaking, the sun god was not Omibella's father. In mysticism, the sun god, who was half a god, could indeed be called Omibella's father. After being stripped of the mind crystal, the negative effects of this sealed artifact have also changed. It's not a bad thing. Roland smiled. Originally, the sealed artifact formed from Omibella's remains had a very unfavorable negative effect. Within its effective range, people could only be killed by their closest relatives, otherwise, they would degenerate into terrifying monsters. This negative effect caused the tragedy of generations of relatives killing each other in City of Silver. Although City of Silver no longer needed to use this sealed artifact and no longer had to bear this negative effect, change was always better than no change. Roland then put away the crystal and returned the altered sealed artifact to the current leader of City of Silver in the Forsaken Land of the Gods, informing him of the sealed artifact's new changes. Seeing the complicated expression on the other party's face after hearing about the sealed artifact's changes, Roland smiled, chatted with the other party about the recent situation of City of Silver, and then chose to leave. This 1,000-year curse has finally ended. After Roland left, the leader of City of Silver looked at the sealed artifact in his hand and sighed. His expression was complex, with a sense of relief and joy. After Roland left the Forsaken Land of the Gods, he naturally found Saussure immediately and informed him of Frank's experimental results. This was clearly good news that made Saussure breathe a sigh of relief. Although mushrooms could not replace staple food, enough mushrooms could still play a significant role. After Roland discussed the subsequent planting and processing of mushrooms with Saussure, he left the executive office and went to another laboratory. That's right, it was the mechanical laboratory established with Rosal and the god of steam and machinery as its core. Unlike the biological laboratory, which was a chaotic mess filled with various strange animals and plants, the mechanical laboratory looked much more normal. At least there was nothing that would make people lose their sanity. Roland passed by many STEAM church members who were conducting experiments or debugging machinery and arrived at the main laboratory door. Through the glass, Roland could see Rosal debugging something similar to a Big Brother mobile phone. The incarnation of the god of steam and machinery was with him, listening to Rosal's instructions while using his extraordinary abilities to perform various operations that Roland couldn't quite understand. Roland didn't disturb them. Only after they finished debugging did he raise his hand and tap on the glass a few times. Who? Rosal looked up and was stunned when he saw Roland. He put down what he was holding, opened the door of the main laboratory, and said with some surprise, "Boss, why are you here?" "I just went to the biological laboratory, and they've made some good progress on the food problem, so I came here to take a look." Roland replied with a smile. His gaze fell on the Big Brother-like device on the experimental table, and he asked curiously, "Is this a Big Brother?" "Actually, it's closer to a walkie-talkie, capable of communication only within a range of about 5 kilometers. I'm currently exploring how to extend this distance." Rosal briefly introduced his recent experimental results. He was able to create this Big Brother, not just through mechanical technology, but also with some extraordinary abilities. "Do you have any inspiration?" Roland continued to ask. Communication equipment was naturally very important, and this was also a recent task Roland had given to Rosal. In any era, the transmission of information is very important. Not to mention directly entering the information age, if something similar to a telephone could be created, many things would become much more convenient. "I'm thinking if we can use the characteristics of uniqueness." Rosal clearly had some ideas, saying spiritedly, "As is well known, the signal of uniqueness can almost cover the entire world. People with uniqueness can easily receive prayers from all over the world. So, if we use uniqueness as a signal-based station, perhaps we can directly take a step forward and establish a worldwide information network." A very creative idea, and very feasible. Roland nodded, affirming Rosal's creativity. So, boss, can I borrow the Black Emperor's uniqueness first? Rosal finally revealed his true intention. Although as the former Black Emperor, theoretically, as long as he entered the resurrection stage, no matter where the Black Emperor's uniqueness was, it would automatically return. But since he had not yet entered the resurrection stage, he naturally could not recall the uniqueness. And after Augustus was overthrown by Roland, the sequence 1 characteristics and uniqueness of the Black Emperor pathway, which were Augustus's property, naturally fell into Roland's hands. Chapter 462, Rosal's Revival Countdown. Hearing this, Roland glanced at Rosal, then laughed and said, "Why don't you be more direct, like, when can I revive? When can I become the Black Emperor again?" "Boss, you figured it out." Rosal first gave a slightly embarrassed smile, but this was clearly just politeness, because the next second Rosal said, "So when exactly can I revive?" "Boss, you've been studying God's spawn Seiya for so long, have you figured anything out?" "Of course, I don't mean to rush you, boss, I'm just a bit curious about your progress." Rosal clearly possessed the qualities of a well-rounded adult. "If there's any experiment that requires my cooperation, I'll actively participate." Roland didn't speak, just looked at him with a half-smile, until Rosal finally showed an awkward smile. All right, I admit I've been a bit anxious lately. After all, boss, you've even overthrown Loan, and 6 of the 7 deities have boarded your pirate ship, are allies with you. Medici is clearly going to become a god once the war ends, and I'm really anxious. Rosal spread his hands, speaking much more sincerely this time. Rosal's words were indeed his true thoughts. Originally, as one of the few Sequence 0s in Roland's faction, even though his strength hadn't recovered, he still had a lot of prestige. But Roland's speed in recruiting people was like a rocket, he'd pull a Sequence 0 onto his pirate ship in no time, and he was generous with his own people. Medici not only became an king of angels again, but Roland even got him a miniature city of calamity. Although Ask didn't have a Beander characteristic, he assimilated the uniqueness of death and became an king of angels. Rosal watched and worried. After all, when there's too much of anything, it loses its value. Lucifer already found him annoying in various ways, and if his strength was still worse than others, how would he get by in the future? Even if Rosal worked for someone, he didn't want to become a marginalized figure. Roland naturally saw what Rosal was anxious about. He smiled and said, "Since you're so anxious to recover, it just so happens that I do have a few experiments here that require your cooperation." Roland had been studying God's spawn Seiya for so long, and he wasn't just slacking off. In fact, Roland had already made some research breakthroughs, it was just that there had been too many things recently, so Roland hadn't found a guinea pig for testing. Now that Rosal, this guinea pig, had actually offered himself up, Roland naturally wouldn't be polite to him. Looking at Roland's familiar smile, some of Rosal's long-dead memories suddenly resurfaced at this moment, which stiffened his body for a few seconds, and his smile also became difficult to maintain. He couldn't help but whisper, "Is it too late for me to back out now?" "What do you think?" Roland asked back with a smile, looking at him. Rosal's smile immediately became awkward. He gave a dry laugh and asked in a parched voice, "I won't die, right?" "No, I can guarantee that. Although I'm not sure if it will cause you pain, you definitely won't die." You won't go completely insane either, at most half insane, and I can pull you back from half insanity," Roland guaranteed, like a quack doctor practicing without a license. "That makes me even more nervous," Rosal couldn't help but retort. He then took a deep breath and didn't really back down, saying directly, "I still have some experimental projects to wrap up here. Give me 2 days, after I'm done, you can do whatever you want." Roland naturally wouldn't object to this and nodded. 2 days later, when Rosal followed Roland to an unfamiliar alternate dimension, he couldn't help but ask a soul-searching question, "Why do we have to come to this place? It's so unlucky." Indeed, the alternate dimension they arrived at was the one where Mr. Door was once imprisoned. "Here, at least we can ensure that even if an accident occurs during the experiment, you won't cause harm to the real world." Roland glanced at Rosal, explained, and then looked at Bethel, saying, "I'll trouble you, Bethel. The spatial ceiling will be up to you later. It's just a small matter." Bethel shook his head. His gaze fell on Rosal, and he was equally curious about the results of the upcoming experiment. After all, Bethel was also troubled by the corruption within him. Although his daily life was no longer affected by the corruption due to Roland's surgery, allowing him to live normally, being unable to continue advancing was ultimately a problem. The apocalypse was coming, and a Lord of the Mysteries had to be born in this world. Honestly, I'm a little nervous, Rosal finally couldn't help but say after Bethel closed the entrance to the alternate dimension. He was truly a bit nervous, or rather, anyone who had experienced Roland's surgery would be nervous before going through it again. Then should I play some music for you? Roland glanced at him, then actually pulled out a speaker, a historical projection version, and began playing a cheerful song. Congratulations on getting rich. Listening to this familiar song, Rosal's DNA almost immediately reacted, and various memes appeared in his mind, greatly alleviating his nervousness. Then let's begin. Roland smiled, his smile gentle and full of excitement, but in Rosal's eyes, it was undoubtedly a bit devilish. What happened in the time that followed became blurry for Rosal. He only vaguely remembered seeming to fall into some nightmare, then repeatedly waking up in the nightmare, only to repeatedly fall back into it, as if caught in some terrifying loop. When Rosal's consciousness finally regained clarity, he didn't know how much time had passed. Is it over? Rosal spoke, sitting up from the sickbed somewhat dazed. His gaze then fell on Roland, but for some unknown reason, he instinctively avoided him. Rosal felt his fingertips trembling, and an immense fear enveloped him, making him a little afraid to face Roland at this moment. So what exactly did I just go through? Rosal was a little afraid to recall it, fearing he would truly be left with a lifelong psychological shadow. So Rosal just tried to calm his emotions, restraining that inexplicable fear. A few minutes later, this transmigrator, with his typical, long Aeotian, demeanor, looked at Roland again, took another deep breath, and finally couldn't resist covering his eyes with his hand, saying, I'm done for, boss, I think I've developed Lucifer phobia. Roland, who was reviewing the recent surgery and thinking about how to improve it, looked at Rosal upon hearing this. He then seemed to ponder for a second, then pulled out a roll of bandages from somewhere and handed them to Rosal, saying very seriously, then cover your eyes. You won't be scared if you cover them. Rosal, what a simple and unadorned method. Chapter 463, Rosal returns. After some thought, Rosal actually took the bandage and wrapped it around his eyes several times. He got more and more into it, striking several classic poses, mostly belonging to famous blind characters. It seems you've recovered well. Roland saw that Rosal still had the energy to cosplay here, and understood that he was fine. Of course, Roland was not surprised by this. After all, he was the one who performed the surgery, so how could he not know if there were any problems? No choice, I've experienced too many unfortunate things, boss. Although your treatment was terrifying, it was ultimately a good thing for me, so I naturally can't be down in the dumps. Rosal spoke with a carefree air. He then probably began to sense his own condition, and his expression gradually became more interesting. What's wrong? Roland looked at him, not explaining anything, and asked with a smile. Boss, this isn't right, why is the corruption still there? Rosal stammered a bit before finally unable to resist asking. He had thought that after this experiment, all the corruption he had suffered would be completely removed. Do you want to sense it again, and see the changes in that corruption? Roland said with a smile. Rosal raised an eyebrow upon hearing this. Having been deeply troubled by corruption in the past, he had always kept his distance from such things, so he hadn't carefully sensed the corruption belonging to the mother goddess just now. But now, hearing Roland's words, Rosal understood everything. He immediately began to carefully observe the corruption that had once made him miserable. After observing for a while, Rosal showed a shocked expression. He looked at Roland and said, this corruption, it's become harmless. I used my power to completely transform them. Now it's just a special kind of power. You can digest it, and it will probably bring you some unique characteristics, Roland finally explained. Having further mastered that kind of power and further understood the characteristics of outer god powers, Roland, after various experiments, finally largely mastered the method of rendering outer god corruption harmless. What was on Rosal now was the result. This is truly, Rosal's expression at this moment was indescribably complex. He then started to laugh, laughing with extreme abandon. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Finally, Rosal suddenly tore off the bandage from his eyes and looked at Roland, saying, "So I can resurrect now?" "That depends on whether you want or not. If you want to, you can at any time," Roland nodded with a smile. "Boss, although you're quite a jerk, two-faced, discriminatory, nepotistic, petty," Rosal suddenly looked at Roland and said, "but you are indeed a very good superior. I think you're asking for a beating." Roland rolled his eyes. He looked at Rosal, annoyed, and said, getting cocky, "Huh? What, you think I can't beat you just because you've advanced to sequence 0? How could that be? I'm just speaking the plain truth, and besides, I praised you, boss." Rosal laughed heartily. He then no longer hesitated and entered the resurrection state. Thus, in the first year of the Republic, Rosal returned. Although the surgery on Rosal was successful, Roland was not in a hurry to perform surgery on others, such as Bethel. After all, judging from Rosal's reaction, this surgery still had some negative effects. For example, Rosal clearly entered a state of emotional instability after the surgery, which was actually a sign of being somewhat mad. By the way, after Rosal's emotions stabilized and he remembered what he had said, he almost wished he could turn back time and slap himself twice. Why did he have to blurt out such plain truths? Didn't he know that Lucifer was the most petty? Lucifer didn't like him much to begin with, and now he would probably try to make his life miserable. Because of this, Rosal plunged into the laboratory, clearly not planning to come out for a short time. Roland was too lazy to bother with him, only continuing to perfect his experiments. During this process, days passed, and the Republic's various policies were steadily implemented. Apart from many people, including Saussure, being stuck in overtime hell due to insufficient manpower, the entire Republic was in excellent shape. Until one day, Roland received a notification from Medici. Intis and Fosak have made their move. They seem to be preparing to form a coalition army with countries like Lindbergh to attack us. Congratulations, Lucifer, Chief Executive, you are now a public enemy of the world. Medici said this with considerable schadenfreude. Congratulations to you too, General Medici, becoming a sequence 0 is within reach. Roland was not angry, only showing a smile. He then stretched, saying, "Perfect, I've been in the laboratory for so long, it's time to go out and stretch my muscles and bones." Medici snorted when he heard this, then remembered something and looked at Roland, saying, "Are you really okay? Do you need my help?" Medici naturally knew that since Fosak had made its move, Roland would then have to help the Evernight goddess kill the god of war. And the god of war was a sequence 0 after all. Although Roland was a sequence 3 who could not be judged by common sense, Medici was still slightly worried. "It's fine, you just focus on being your general. Take this opportunity to counterattack, completely liberate those countries, and then advance to Red Priest. As for me, I'll have someone to assist me," Roland said with a smile. Medici raised an eyebrow. He clearly thought of something and said, "Rosal." Medici naturally knew about Rosal's resurrection and his regaining the Black Emperor. In fact, Rosal recently used his Sequence 0 as a central hub to create a simple, widely usable communication device, which was immediately put into use by the military. As the military commander and a general of the Republic, Medici naturally couldn't be unaware. His mind wasn't quite clear last time, and he said some unpleasant things. He's eager to make amends now. Bringing him along this time will also put his mind at ease, Roland nodded. He looked up out the window, then smiled and said, "So, next, let us go liberate the whole world." In the first year of the Republic, Intis and Fosak, allied with Lindbergh, Fenipot, and other nations, sought to form an anti-Susha alliance to overthrow the reformers led by Roland and restore the nobility to greatness. However, on the first day the alliance was formed, civil war broke out in Intis. With the support of the Eternal Blaze Church and the God of Steam and Machinery Church, the oppressed people within Intis bravely launched an uprising. They then received aid from the Susha Republic. For a time, Intis was plunged into internal strife and had no time to launch external wars. The situation in Intis was not an isolated case. While Intis was embroiled in civil war and an uprising broke out domestically, the kingdoms of Lindbergh and Fenipot also experienced uprising wars. The sparks of rebellion were officially ignited in these countries. The only exception was probably Fosak. This country, which only worshipped the god of war, did not suffer a betrayal from its church, but their god faced an even more severe situation. Chapter 464, The God of War Falls on Hard Times. The God of War had an ominous premonition. As the only one pulled down by Roland, never contacted, and even had news of him tacitly blocked by other Sequence Zero true deities, the God of War could be said to know the least about Roland's existence, but he was by no means completely unaware of the other party's presence. Mainly, Roland had always acted high profile, sometimes not hiding his actions at all. No matter how dull the God of War was, facing the rapidly changing situation, he would sense an invisible hand behind it. It was just that the God of War was not sure who this existence was, or what kind of strength he possessed. However, the God of War could faintly sense a malice. That malice did not come directly from the unknown existence who had unified the other deities, but rather indirectly revealed itself through the attitude of the other true deities towards him. Especially when Loan underwent drastic changes, and Intis and Lindbergh and other countries planned to form an anti-Susha alliance, only to be backstabbed by the Church, the God of War understood, unbeknownst to him, all true deities except him had already pledged allegiance to the other side. Including the Earth Mother. To be honest, when he realized this, the God of War's first reaction was one of absurdity. As a deity who had lived from the Second Epoch until now, the God of War understood his old colleagues too well. These guys, who would fight among themselves even when facing a strong enemy, would never unite unless they faced an irresistible force. And the Earth Mother, as his mother, his most steadfast ally, the God of War gritted his teeth at this thought, completely unable to understand how his own mother could suddenly defect to the other side. This simply defied logic. Most importantly, since all the true deities had joined the other party, why had no one informed him? What was he lacking compared to the Evernight Goddess and the others? The God of War truly couldn't quite understand, and while perplexed, a strong sense of unease filled his heart. He had always been a confident being, even occasionally appearing somewhat arrogant, but no matter how arrogant, the God of War did not believe he could single-handedly contend against 6 former colleagues, especially when the other side was suspected of having a special existence that had unified the 6 deities. I cannot sit idly by, I must seek other allies. The God of War's eyes flickered. He was not foolish. Since the other party had recruited the other 6 true deities but had specifically excluded him, their attitude towards him was very clear. Although the God of War didn't understand why, he would never wait for death. So the God of War then contacted his most loyal angel, instructing him to reach out to the demoness sect, the hidden sage, and other existences. While seeking allies, the God of War also planned to prepare a few more resurrection contingencies for himself, just in case. However, before the God of War could act this time, he suddenly heard a tremendous commotion from the edge of his divine kingdom, as if someone had kicked the door of his divine kingdom. God of War, what's going on? Have they already come knocking? Just as the God of War was wavering, another loud bang came, accompanied by a boisterous voice. God of War inside, listen up, you are surrounded. Do not resist stubbornly, that way, at least you will die with more dignity. Even a clay figure has a bit of fire, let alone the God of War, who is not a good-tempered person to begin with. Faced with this situation of being attacked, he naturally couldn't sit still, so he grabbed his weapon and went to where the loud bang came from. A gap had already been kicked open there, and outside the gap, 4 figures stood openly. One person was completely enveloped in a cloak, with a black veil covering her face and 3 pairs of arms. One person's smile was filled with the loving light of a holy mother, wearing a dress adorned with wheat ears. One wore magnificent robes, a crown on his head, and was playing with a strange deck of cards. One wore gold-rimmed glasses, held a book in his arms, and was full of scholarly aura, like a true scholar. The Evernight Goddess, the Earth Mother, Rosal, and the God of War naturally couldn't fail to recognize his old acquaintances, and while he wasn't very familiar with Rosal, he had paid attention to him. Only the last person, the God of War had never seen. But he still recognized the other party. It was Lucifer, the administrator of the Susha Republic. It's him, it's really him. The God of War withdrew his gaze, preparing for battle, but he did not immediately make a move. Instead, he looked at the Earth Mother and said, I'm not surprised that others are here, but why are you here, Mother? When he said this, the God of War's expression was genuinely perplexed, even a little pained. The Earth Mother lowered her eyes upon hearing this. She seemed to sigh, but then the corners of her mouth curled up the next second. Lilith looked up at the God of War. She suddenly reached up and touched her face, and her appearance changed at that moment. "What do you think?" Lilith asked with a slight smile, her red eyes, symbolizing the vampires, carrying a blatant schadenfreude. Lilith. The God of War immediately recognized this former vampire ancestor. His eyes widened, even bloodshot due to his agitated emotions. The God of War said in disbelief, "Impossible. How could you? No, when did you? It was a long time ago." Lilith had no intention of hiding it anymore and said with a smile, "Actually, when I first took over this identity, it wasn't specifically to backstab you, but later it became convenient to use, and the Evernight Goddess also sought my cooperation, so I've been using this identity ever since. I originally planned to give you a surprise when you made a move against the Evernight Goddess, but unfortunately." Lilith sighed and shook her head, her expression a little regretful. If according to the original plan, she would naturally only reveal her identity when the Evernight Goddess and the God of War had a 1v1 duel, to give the God of War a little surprise. But now the plan had changed, the original plan was unfeasible, and they could only face the God of War head-on. Fortunately, it wasn't a big problem. Lilith glanced at Rosal, who had already recovered his Sequence 0 strength, then looked at the unfathomable Roland, and finally her gaze fell upon the God of War, saying with a smile, "You don't need to think about escaping, the space in this area has been sealed. Although Bethel has not officially advanced to Sequence 0 yet, with the power of Saphira Castle, you cannot break his seal." To prevent the God of War from causing destruction in the real world, Roland naturally made full preparations, such as having Bethel seal the space. As for the power of Saphira Castle, Little K actively lent it to Bethel. The God of War's expression changed slightly, not only because of Lilith's words but also because he confirmed that he truly had no escape now. That's right, although shocked that his own mother suddenly turned into Lilith, the God of War, while shocked, was also secretly looking for a retreat. "It seems I am destined to die here today." The God of War suddenly chuckled self-deprecatingly. He looked up at Roland and asked calmly, "I don't understand, since you are willing to accept others, why am I the only one excluded? Is there any reason why I must die?" Chapter 465 The Fall of the God of War. "Probably because you are Omibella's child." Roland met his gaze, showing no intention of hiding anything, and said with a smile, "Omibella is a very special existence. She must die, so you must also die." The God of War was speechless at this moment. He truly didn't know what special identity his biological mother had, but that didn't prevent him from discerning Roland's attitude. The other party held no ill will towards him, but no goodwill either. He just wanted to kill him, nothing more. Ha! How ridiculous, everything is so ridiculous. The God of War suddenly laughed, not madly, nor despairingly. He just laughed for a while, then suddenly raised the great sword in his hand and pointed it at the Evernight Goddess, saying, "Knight, perhaps I will be killed by you today, but I still refuse to submit to you. You are not a warrior, you are merely a conspirer, a ridiculous and pathetic conspirer. A fellow like you, as long as the prophet is sufficient, can betray anything and everything." The God of War said, "It was like that with the demonic wolf back then, and it was the same with the sun god later. So what about now? When will you betray your current master?" The Evernight Goddess was neither angry nor did she retort. She simply looked at the God of War calmly and said, "Aren't you the same? Or have you forgotten why your father died?" The Giant King fell at the hands of the Sun God, yet the God of War, as the Giant King's son, obtained some of his characteristics and even joined the Rose Redemption. The reason for this was obvious. The God of War continued to smile and said, "Yes, I am like this, and my father was like this. We are all the same kind of people, equally pathetic, equally ridiculous." He seemed to have finally laughed enough, reining in his smile, and looked at Roland, saying, "I don't know what kind of existence you are, but let me warn you, few of this woman's superiors and allies come to a good end. Many people have died, yet she has always lived. This is not a simple coincidence. Are you trying to sow discord?" Roland asked with a smile in return. "You can think so." The God of War did not deny it, because he truly was trying to sow discord. "You seem rather interesting now," Roland commented, then suddenly said with great interest, although it's impossible to let you go, do you have any other wishes? Wishes. The god of war paused. No one knew what he was thinking at that moment. Others could only see the god of war shaking his head after a few seconds of silence, saying, I have no other wishes. If possible, let me die like a warrior. I am the god of war, the god of battle. I should meet my destruction in battle. Can it be a group fight? Roland pondered for a second, then seriously asked, after all, if it's a one-on-one, probably no one here can defeat you. Although warriors are routinely mocked, no one can deny that in a direct confrontation, a warrior is undoubtedly the T0. Ha ha ha, I couldn't ask for more. The god of war's gaze swept over everyone, his smile very uninhibited, and he said, I am also very curious about my limits, and how many sequence 0s it will take to kill me. The god of war met his end in a thoroughly satisfying battle. Regardless of what kind of person he had been, whether glorious, arrogant, or insidious, at least at this moment, the god of war was truly enjoying a battle. Even if the outcome of this battle was inevitably his destruction. When the sharp sword in Roland's hand pierced through the god of war's chest, destroying his heart and all his vitality, delivering the final blow, the god of war did not look at him, nor did he look at anyone present. He merely looked in a certain direction. Blood overflowed from his mouth. The god of war finally looked at Roland, his eyes somewhat unfocused, and said, You can go to the forsaken land of the gods, right? Roland nodded, not denying it, and merely asked, Do you want to be buried in the giant king's court? Thank you. The god of war smiled, a smile of some relief. He took one last look at Lilith, but said nothing, merely closing his eyes. And so, in the first year of the Republic, the god of war fell. The time memoir potion has been digested a bit more. Why? Roland felt the further digestion of the time memoir potion within him and understood the reason after a moment's thought. It was probably because Lilith's backstabbing of the god of war could, to some extent, be considered a historical replication. After all, whether it was the false god, the sun god, killing Omibella back then, or the god of war backstabbing the giant king, there was a certain similarity to this scene. And the historical replication required by the potion evidently did not demand 100% accuracy. Honestly, thinking about it this way, the giant king's family is simply cursed. They're stuck in a cycle of kin-slaying. Roland couldn't help but lament in his heart. Although Lilith was not the god of war's biological mother, since the sun god was considered Omibella's father, Lilith could naturally be considered the god of war's mother. After this digestion, Roland was basically certain that even if he didn't orchestrate any more major events, simply relying on the various policies being replicated by the Republic, his time memoir potion would be fully digested in just a few days. As for the ritual to advance to a fabricator, Roland was basically counting on Medici's advancement to sequence 0. After all, it was not easy to completely erase the traces of a sequence 0 in a short period. The god of war was, after all, a true god, and too many people believed in him. Roland couldn't brainwash them one by one. The 6 gods were able to erase the sun god's existence mainly through the passage of long eons. So, compared to erasing the god of war's traces, Roland preferred to fabricate Medici's past. In fact, Roland had already been doing so. In recent days, stories about the Republic's general had spread throughout the streets and alleys, becoming tales everyone enjoyed discussing. Of course, if something unexpected happened with Medici, the god of war could also serve as a backup. After all, he was indeed killed by Roland's own hand, which met the ritual requirements. This was also why Roland personally delivered the final blow. Alas! Lilith looked at the god of war's remains and suddenly sighed, her eyes a little complex. What, you really considered him your son? Roland turned his head to look at Lilith, asking with some curiosity. He accompanied me for many, many years, from the second epoch until now. Lilith neither admitted nor denied. She just said softly, actually, sometimes I can't tell if I was truly touched when he called me mother. Lilith was the god of war's false mother, yet she accompanied him longer than his true mother, Omibella. So long that sometimes Lilith would also feel a little dazed, wondering if she was truly Lilith, the progenitor of the vampires, or Omibella, the goddess of harvest of the giants. She had played this role for too long, so long that she had long become indistinguishable from the role. Chapter 466 Dark Angel Evil Spirit. But you still mercilessly decided to kill him, Roland said bluntly, looking at Lilith. The genuine emotion was real, and so was the intent to kill. Lilith didn't deny it. She just pulled at the corner of her mouth, a smile with a hint of self-mockery. This is us, this is Sequence Zero. What the war god said was right, we are such ridiculous existences. We live with madness, coexist with madness. In pursuit of power, and in pursuit of survival, we often lose even ourselves. Don't casually represent Sequence Zero, Rosal suddenly interjected at this moment, refuting her. At least I wouldn't be willing to be so ruthless to the kid I've raised for thousands of years. Lilith glanced at him, smiled, and said noncommittally, perhaps. Rosal immediately frowned, intending to argue with Lilith. After all, children were, in a sense, Rosal's inverse scale. In other matters, Rosal might not act human, but when it came to matters related to children, Rosal could still be considered a good father. All right, both of you say less. Roland naturally wouldn't stand by and watch the two of them argue. He reached out and patted Rosal's shoulder, saying, Lilith is in a bad mood, so don't bother with her. Roland then looked at Lilith and asked, do you want to preside over his funeral? Lilith was silent for a few seconds, then shook her head and said, forget it. What kind of thing would it be for me to hold his funeral? It would be too hypocritical. Roland didn't insist, nodding and saying, okay, then I'll hand this over to someone else. Roland planned to entrust the war god's funeral to Colin Iliad. After all, City of Silver was once part of the Giant Kingdom, so having Colin Iliad, the chief of City of Silver, host the war god's funeral could be seen as a form of closure. However, considering the Dark Angel evil spirit in the Giant King's court, Roland didn't directly hand this matter to Colin Iliad, but instead found Saussure first. At that time, Saussure was working overtime. The various affairs of the Republic were already numerous enough, not to mention that recently, in order to liberate other countries, war had reignited, making Saussure even busier. Saussure, have you ever considered taking a break? Looking at Saussure, who appeared haggard and seemed to be on the verge of sudden death, even Roland felt a little pained and advised him. Don't worry, I know my physical condition. If I'm truly on the verge of sudden death, I'll rest. Saussure clearly knew what Roland was worried about. He showed a comforting smile, then thought of something and asked, is the war god's matter concluded? His expression wasn't surprised. After all, the fall of a true god caused a significant stir, and even Saussure, being there, wasn't completely unaware. Yes, next I plan to hold a funeral for him, which can be considered a fitting tribute to the war god church's protection of the Fosak people for so many years. Roland didn't deny it, nodding. Although he killed the war god, he didn't deny the war god's achievements. Regardless of how the society was governed, the war god church, like other Orthodox god churches, protected ordinary people from various dangerous beyonders and monsters. This was also the reason Roland was willing to give the war god a dignified end. He might not have been a good person, but he was not without merit. He indeed deserves a funeral. Saussure's expression was somewhat complex. For him, the war god was not an enemy, at least not in the third epic. But Saussure also knew that times had changed and understood the war god's special nature, so he did not object to Roland and the others killing the war god. Where do you plan to bury him? Saussure asked. The Giant King's court, that's what he hoped for, Roland said directly, without concealment. So I plan to resolve the small problem there in the Giant King's court. Saussure clearly knew the current situation of the Giant King's court. Upon hearing this, he said, the Giant King's court is very important, or rather, the blasphemy slate lost there is very important. Currently, we can only rely on the blasphemy slate to relatively safely control the Chaos Sea. Roland glanced at him and suddenly asked, then what do you think of the evil spirit Dark Angel? He is not me. Saussure was silent for a few seconds, then shook his head and said, he is just a remnant thought. The real me has long merged with the sun god's humanity and become the true creator. He is just a remnant thought, eroded by the Chaos Sea and twisted by God. Since even you say so, then it seems there's no saving him, tisk. Roland clicked his tongue, slightly disappointed. He really hoped that the Dark Angel evil spirit was also Saussure, as the Republic was truly short on people right now. If they could have another Saussure, it would be double the happiness. Saussure clearly saw what Roland was thinking. He smiled helplessly, then showed a hesitant expression, and after a few seconds said, although he is not me, if you intend to use him as a tool, perhaps it's not impossible. Oh, tell me more in detail. Roland's eyes instantly lit up as he asked enthusiastically. Although he is just a remnant thought, he has persisted for so many years. Although he was eroded by the Chaos Sea, he also gained stability because of it. Saussure clearly didn't intend to keep him in suspense and replied, if Adam takes action, perhaps he can be completed, allowing him to truly become a complete existence. But, Saussure's expression became a bit more serious. Such an existence is inherently closely linked to the Chaos Sea. If he cannot be suppressed, then he could also become a big problem. Wow. Roland raised an eyebrow. After thinking for a few seconds, he smiled and said, but conversely, if he stands on our side, he will also be a good helper. Saussure didn't deny it. Rather, it was precisely because he considered this point that he proposed the previous plan. An existence closely linked to the Chaos Sea is both a danger and an opportunity. In that case, let's set off. Roland suddenly smiled, reaching out and patting Saussure's shoulder. Whether it's danger or opportunity, we have to try to find out, don't we? He was always willing to try. Adhering to the principle of acting immediately, Roland quickly found Adam and informed him of the matter. So what's your opinion? Roland asked Adam with a smile. Adam looked at him, golden eyes flashing with thought. After a moment, he nodded and said, it's worth trying, but safety must be ensured. The safety Adam spoke of naturally referred to the ability to suppress the opponent even if he went mad. Even with humanity, Adam still preferred to pursue a foolproof approach in his actions. Chapter 467 You should trust Bethel. If anything unexpected happens, I'll summon the Sun God, Roland said crisply. The Dark Angel evil spirit is not God after all. Even if he can mobilize some of the Chaos Sea's power, he can't be stronger than the Sun God. If it really doesn't work, I can also let God solve this problem himself. God is a smart person, he knows what to do. Then I have no problem. Adam nodded, paused, and then added, it's best to bring little K along. Having Saphira Castle can prevent some unexpected situations. That's what I thought too, so I've already notified them, Roland said with a smile. How could he not bring little K into something like this? Adam was clearly not surprised by this. He just seemed to think of something else and asked, since Rosal has successfully resurrected, it means you already have a perfect solution for the outer god's pollution. So, when do you plan to let Bethel become a god? Bethel had already completed his god ascension ritual and could become a sequence 0 at any time, but he had been suppressing himself for various reasons. Initially, this reason was the celestial worthy, and later it was due to the outer god's pollution. Soon. I've already improved several versions of the treatment plan. Now the side effects of the surgery have been reduced to the lowest possible level. I'll perform the surgery on him in a few days, and then he can advance, Roland said without any intention of hiding anything. As for advancing to Lord of the Mysteries, Roland paused here before saying, it's very troublesome. My power is too close to the essence of Lord of the Mysteries. If I really do something, it's easy for problems to arise. Just as Harabergen, the god of wisdom and knowledge, almost got trapped just by glancing at the bubbles formed by the power of the bubbles, an existence like Lord of the Mysteries, which is similar to Nyarlathotep, or even has consistency in mysticism, can easily produce a strange reaction with Nyarlathotep's power. Don't think this is a good thing. Just as God's madness would affect the high-sequence individuals of all 5 families, if Lord of the Mysteries were driven mad by Roland, it would also be a troublesome matter. Adam was equally unsurprised by this. He just looked at Roland and suddenly said, perhaps you should believe him. Roland was stunned for a moment. Adam continued, since you believe in Bethel's humanity, then you should believe him. He will defeat Lord of the Mysteries, even without your help. Roland fell silent. After a long time, he finally smiled and said, you are right, I really should believe him. But worry is still unavoidable, Roland sighed again. Is this being worried out of concern? Adam asked. Perhaps. Roland smiled, thinking of Bethel, who had been hesitant to speak all this time, and said thoughtfully, perhaps this is also what he hopes for. Seeing the people around him become gods one by one, and seeing the apocalypse drawing nearer, could Bethel truly not be anxious at all? He was probably anxious. It's just that with Bethel's personality, he wouldn't express this as directly as Rosal unless absolutely necessary. Looks like I need to talk to him, Roland murmured, then temporarily put the matter aside and looked at Adam, saying, but before that, let's go deal with the Dark Angel evil spirit first. Since this world was afflicted by Roland, the forsaken land of the gods has undoubtedly become even livelier. But no matter how lively it got, it was still just a small area. The giant king's court, far from human habitation, remained as quiet as a dead land. However, today, the quiet of the giant king's court was broken as a group of uninvited guests arrived at this long-abandoned ruin. Is this the giant king's court? Little K followed behind a group of important figures, looking up at the palace in front of him, which was clearly a giant's dwelling based on its size, with a hint of curiosity. He had heard of this place a long time ago, but today was the first time he had seen it with his own eyes. The king's court is really gone. Beside Little K was the giant Grossel, who had also been brought along by Roland this time. After all, Roland had once promised to help him return home. At this moment, looking at the giant king's court, which had already been reduced to ruins, Grossel's expression was naturally very sad. Even though he had learned this fact from others long ago, upon seeing this scene with his own eyes, the tall giant still couldn't help but kneel on the ground and weep uncontrollably. Colin Iliad, who was also brought along to help host the god of war's funeral, looked up at the palace in front of him with a very complex expression. This palace, only recorded in the ancient texts of City of Silver, was a very special existence for the people of City of Silver, who once believed in the giant king. Roland simply surveyed the palace in front of him with an appreciative gaze. After giving the giant king's aesthetics a score in his heart, he looked in a certain direction. That was the core of the giant king's court, and also where the dark angel evil spirit resided. Colin, you and Grossel stay here. Little K, Jack, Little Amon, the three of you can follow along. True Creator, you look after them. After arranging the little ones, Roland turned his head to look at Adam and said, let's go. The others naturally had no objections to this arrangement. Soon, Colin Iliad stayed behind to look after the emotional Grossel, while the three little ones mingled behind Roland and the others, following Roland to the place where the dark angel evil spirit was sealed. Naturally, they encountered some dangers on the way, but for this team, which had King of Angels and True God, there were no problems whatsoever. You're still alive, a slightly puzzled voice sounded. The figure of the dark angel evil spirit emerged from the shadows. His gaze fell on Saussure, with obvious confusion in his expression. He then looked at True Creator, his expression looking even more confused. I suppose I'm alive. Saussure didn't explain anything. He looked at the evil spirit in front of him, whose appearance was identical to his own, and said gently, you can also live. The dark angel evil spirit was stunned for a moment and said, but I am just a lingering obsession of yours, an evil spirit destined to perish. We can help you become complete, help you truly become a person, Saussure continued. Due to his identity, he was naturally the main force in negotiating with the dark angel evil spirit this time. Help me. The dark angel evil spirit was clearly very surprised. He then seemed to think of something, looked at Adam, seemed to understand something, and then looked at Saussure, saying, perhaps you can indeed help me become complete, but if you intend to use me to control the Chaos Sea, then you might be disappointed. You are unwilling. Saussure's expression remained gentle. I have nothing to be unwilling about. As your remnant and your obsession, helping you is natural for me. The dark angel evil spirit shook his head and said, but you might have overlooked one point. I am not me. Besides your obsession, the greater part of this body belongs to madness and chaos, and I cannot suppress them. As soon as the dark angel evil spirit finished speaking, his eyes lost their clarity, and the part belonging to madness took control of the evil spirit. Chapter 468, Shao Amon, Main Body, Drop the Gold Coins. Frankly, the dark angel evil spirit's strength wasn't particularly great, otherwise, Klein in the original story wouldn't have been able to defeat it by only teaming up with Colin Iliad and others. But this doesn't mean the dark angel evil spirit was easy to deal with. In fact, even a normal sequence 0 wouldn't want to fight the dark angel evil spirit. Because the dark angel evil spirit could, to a certain extent, mobilize the power of the Chaos Sea, and Saphira, for anyone other than its direct possessor or a very few lucky individuals perfectly attuned to it, was a honey-coated poison. Fortunately, this wasn't a problem for Roland and the others. After all, among those present, Roland didn't fear Saphira, Little K possessed Saphira Castle, and Saucereer was practically half-owner of the Chaos Sea. With the three of them there, subduing the Dark Angel evil spirit truly wasn't an issue. And after forcefully suppressing the Dark Angel evil spirit, it was naturally Adam's turn to shine. This super spectator, who had once helped Medici maintain his sanity even in an evil spirit state, stepped forward and, after a very skilled series of operations, the Dark Angel evil spirit's eyes, which had been occupied by chaos and madness, regained their clarity. My apologies, I hope I didn't hurt any of you. The Dark Angel evil spirit chose to apologize immediately after regaining consciousness. It truly lived up to being a remnant thought of Saucereer, its conduct was clearly very similar to Saucereer's. Then, the Dark Angel evil spirit seemed to recall something and looked at Little K with slight hesitation. Saphira Castle. Yes, Your Excellency. Little K also hesitated for a moment, mainly struggling with how to address this Mr. Evil Spirit in front of him, and finally decided to skip the name and just use, Your Excellency. The Dark Angel evil spirit's gaze then fell upon Amon beside Little K. Thinking of how well the two had cooperated in the recent battle, clearly having a good relationship, it couldn't help but fall silent. This world had indeed become something it couldn't understand. Although it had been sealed in the Giant King's court, as an evil spirit, the Dark Angel evil spirit was not entirely ignorant of external affairs. At least, it occasionally received some information, and it was precisely because of this that it probably knew how Amon had gone astray since the fall of the Sun God and Saucereer. Now, the astray Amon could actually coexist harmoniously with the possessor of Saphira Castle, instead of tricking them out of their Saphira Castle and eating them like a small biscuit. This showed that truly earth-shattering changes had occurred in the outside world. Sixth Daddy, why are you looking at me like that? Amon naturally noticed the Dark Angel evil spirit's gaze and immediately spoke with a grin. Sixth Daddy. The address from Amon's mouth clearly made the Dark Angel evil spirit pause, revealing a clear expression of doubt. That's right. Amon nodded as a matter of course, then began counting on his fingers. First Daddy Sun God, second Daddy Saucereer, third Daddy True Creator, fourth Daddy Adam, fifth Daddy Medici, so your sixth Daddy. He spoke with conviction, yet everyone present fell silent for a few seconds. Aren't you refusing to acknowledge the identities of True Creator and Adam? Roland glanced at Amon, asking with some curiosity. That's the main body. The main body not acknowledging them doesn't mean I don't acknowledge them. I've already cut ties with the main body. Amon said with great righteousness, although I won't treat them as the same person, both Adam and True Creator have always looked after the Amons. The main body is heartless for not acknowledging them, but I won't be heartless. I have a super good conscience. Heh. Amon's main body, which had appeared in a corner at some point, suddenly chuckled twice. He raised his hand and pushed the monocle on his face, looking at Amon with cold eyes. Indeed, I should have recycled you directly back then. But who told you not to recycle me back then? Now you want to recycle me, it's too late. Amon's smile was very joyful. After saying this, he also took the opportunity to hide behind Adam, then poked out half his head and said seriously. Oh, right, main body, I feel like sequence 3 is a bit insufficient now. When are you going to drop another gold coin for me? I'm not greedy, sequence 2 will do. He looked extremely annoying. Amon's main body. This was the first time he found himself so annoying. Amon's main body looked deeply at Amon, then at Adam, who, though not making any obvious moves, was clearly protecting Amon, and said with a smile, I think matters between Amons perhaps don't concern outsiders. But I don't think I'm an outsider, Amon. I am Amon's fourth daddy, so I naturally have a responsibility to protect him. Adam also spoke with a smile. He gazed at his good son in front of him, his golden eyes carrying a faint smile. Of course, if I were also your fourth daddy, then I would naturally treat you all equally. You'll dream faster. Amon's main body gave a crisp answer, then glanced at Amon and said, you'd best hide behind your wild daddies forever. Amon's body stiffened, then relaxed, and he said with a grin, it's okay, I have many daddies. Strictly speaking, Mr. Lucifer can even be considered my wild daddy. Ah, do I count too? Roland looked at Amon, his expression a bit curious. Of course. Without you, there would be no Amon, and you've always taught Amon what humanity is. You are Amon's teacher, and a teacher can certainly be considered a type of daddy. Amon nodded, explaining very logically. That makes a lot of sense. Roland nodded, tentatively accepting Amon's calculation method. According to your calculation, it seems I also count as your daddy. Amon's main body pushed the monocle on his face, looked at Amon, and said with a smile. Of course. Amon nodded as a matter of course, then looked at Amon and said, so, 8th daddy, when are you going to drop the gold coin? Amon's main body, 6. Amon's main body clearly couldn't be bothered to argue with Amon. After all, ultimately, Amon was essentially himself. Even though he wasn't directly controlled like a marionette, his emotions were, to a certain extent, interconnected with his. Some of Amon's behaviors might actually be Amon's own true thoughts. Amon's main body then looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit and said with interest, you plan to save him. For the Chaos Sea. Before anyone could answer, Amon's main body shook his head and looked at Roland, saying, no, that's not right. With your style, you certainly wouldn't be purely for the Chaos Sea, or even primarily for the Chaos Sea. I guess it's because you're short on tools again. Roland immediately showed a shy smile, which was quite rare for him. Roland said, I can't help it. The Republic has too many things to deal with recently. Saussure is really on the verge of overworking himself to death. I can't really let him become the first angel in history to die from overwork. I have to find someone to share the burden with him. Chapter 469. Adam also pities Saussure's hard life. Amon's true body was clearly not surprised by this. He then glanced at Saussure, who looked haggard and was indeed dancing on the edge of sudden death from overwork. He couldn't help but shake his head and say, working for you is truly risking one's life. You can't blame me for this. Roland immediately became displeased and retorted, I also hope Saussure can rest, but he insists on working overtime. What can I do? It's not my whip that drives him to work, but his sense of responsibility to this world. Saussure smiled a little sheepishly upon hearing this and said, Amon, don't worry, I have a sense of proportion. The sooner I finish things, the sooner the people of this world can find happiness. My personal fatigue is nothing. Amon's true body clicked his tongue upon hearing this. Although he had gradually come to understand what humanity was, the importance of humanity, and had even gained some humanity, Amon still couldn't understand Saussure's actions of sacrificing himself for others. Wouldn't a little rest not delay anything? Excuse me, can someone answer my confusion? The Dark Angel Evil Spirit, who had been observing silently, finally couldn't help but speak at this moment and asked, what did you just say? What, tool person? And what exactly is Saussure working for now? Saussure first looked at Roland, and after seeing him nod, he then looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit and said with a smile, this is a long story. Saussure then briefly explained how they had initiated reforms during this period, had already established a new regime, and were now striving to liberate the entire world. Finally, Saussure said, this is also one of the reasons we came to find you. The Republic is currently very short on people, so we all hope to have another capable helper. Of course, it would be even better if you could slightly influence the Chaos Sea, but it's okay if you can't, Saussure paused and added with a smile. So that's how it is, it's really like this, how wonderful. The Dark Angel Evil Spirit's eyes lit up upon hearing this, his expression a mix of relief and emotion. He then looked at Roland and said, if what I said is true, and you truly liberated this world and those oppressed people, then I am very willing to contribute to this great cause. Roland's eyes also lit up when he heard this. He couldn't help but smile and say, as for whether these things are true, you can wait until you leave the forsaken land of the gods and see for yourself, witness it with your own eyes. I believe what you see will not disappoint you. Then Roland looked at Adam and asked, can you do it? What was being asked here was naturally whether Adam could help the Dark Angel Evil Spirit complete his soul and gain a complete personality. Yes, although it's a bit troublesome, it's not a big problem. Adam nodded. When he had just helped the Dark Angel Evil Spirit suppress his madness and chaos and helped him regain consciousness, Adam had already checked his condition and had spent this time thinking of a treatment plan. Adam then looked at the Dark Angel evil spirit and said, "Next, you must completely open your mind to me, so that I can truly complete your soul." "I have no problem. Anyway, in my opinion, we were originally one person." The Dark Angel evil spirit nodded without hesitation. If it were someone else doing this, he might refuse, but Adam was naturally different. After all, Adam was also him. Adam was not surprised by this either. He took a step forward and stood before the Dark Angel evil spirit. The Dark Angel evil spirit naturally cooperated and released his mental defenses. However, just before Adam's power invaded his mind, the Dark Angel evil spirit thought of something and said, "You are completely different from what I understood. Although I have never seen you, in the information I obtained, you did not have such abundant emotions. Is this not good?" Adam looked at him indifferently and retorted, "No, this is very good, much better than I expected." The Dark Angel evil spirit smiled and then said, "So now I am very curious, what kind of existence is the person who changed you all?" As he spoke, the corner of his eye glanced at Roland, with deep inquiry and curiosity. "You will know, it won't be long," Adam said with a smile, his tone somewhat profound, and with a hint of pity. Even Adam would feel that Saussure, who worked overtime every day, had a hard life. After all, to be honest, even the sun god actually didn't want to work, otherwise why would he have pushed everything to Saussure back then? The Dark Angel evil spirit apparently realized this too, his expression strange for a second, and then he closed his eyes. Adam's repair of his soul began. While Adam was repairing the Dark Angel evil spirit's soul, Roland pulled something out of a hidden corner. "This is the profane slate. It looks so ordinary." Roland examined the profane slate in front of him, stroking his chin and commenting. Then he thought of something else and waved at little K, who was curiously looking over from not far away, saying, "Don't peek around over there, come and see. Your subsequent potion formulas are all here." Upon hearing this, although little K was a little embarrassed, he quickly came over and began to read the contents of the profane slate, focusing on remembering the seer pathway potion formulas. Roland had already lost interest in the profane slate. He only thought of something else and, after little K finished memorizing the seer pathway potion formulas, said, "If all goes well, Bethel will soon be promoted to sequence 0. Little K was stunned when he heard this, then he couldn't help but show a surprised smile, clearly very happy, saying, "Really? That's great." Little K was genuinely happy that Bethel could be promoted to sequence 0. After all, Bethel was also considered his teacher, and their relationship was still very good. After Bethel is promoted to sequence 0, perhaps it won't be long before he tries to be promoted to Lord of the Mysteries. Roland continued, looking at little K and saying unhurriedly, "At that time, your Saphira castle will no longer belong to you. Strictly speaking, this is not my Saphira castle, I am not its true owner." Little K shook his head and looked at Roland, saying, "Mr. Lucifer, if you want to ask me if I regret it, I can tell you clearly that I do not regret it. I have no desire to become the Lord of the Mysteries. This position, this power, should rightfully be given to the most suitable person." This was little K's true feelings. Becoming the Lord of the Mysteries, while signifying supreme power, also simultaneously represented infinite responsibility and an almost complete loss of humanity. Little K did not crave power, nor did he reject responsibility, but he was truly afraid of losing his humanity, losing himself. Chapter 470, The Rebirth of the Dark Angel Evil Spirit. Actually, I once asked Bethel if he was afraid of losing his humanity. He was braver than me, and he desired that power even more. Little K's words brought back memories of his previous conversation with Bethel. At that time, he had asked, "Mr. Bethel, aren't you afraid? Becoming the Lord of the Mysteries means endless struggle with celestial worthy, and it means almost complete loss of humanity. I am very afraid." And how did Mr. Bethel respond then? Bethel fell silent for a second upon hearing this, then he smiled and said, "Actually, I am also very afraid, but I desire this power even more. I long to become stronger, to ascend to the peak of the sequences. I was once powerless, every single second I was in the Mother Goddess's hands, every moment I was suppressed by the contaminated personality. Precisely because of this, I crave this power even more." Little K, Bethel looked at little K, his gaze gentle, like an elder watching his junior. I also wish to use this power to protect you all, to protect this world, to protect everyone I care about, and everything that matters to me. I refuse to fall into that powerless situation again. Bethel said, then suddenly reached out and patted little K's shoulder, saying, I know, you probably can't understand this feeling, but that's not a bad thing. Experiencing powerlessness is not a good thing. You are still just a child, and a child should grow freely under the protection of elders, not be forced to mature prematurely, pushed onto a high platform, and become a sacrifice for salvation. It was hard to describe little K's emotions after hearing Bethel's words then. He just felt like crying, a mix of grievance and relief. Even little K didn't know why such emotions welled up in him at that moment. He couldn't help but say, thank you, Mr. Bethel. Don't thank me, rather, I should thank you for giving me Saphira Castle, for giving me the opportunity to become the Lord of the Mysteries, Bethel said, smiling as he looked at him. After composing himself, little K felt a bit embarrassed and couldn't help but change the subject, saying, actually, I'm not a child anymore, I'm already in my 20s. Are you sure you want to say that in front of me, who is over 2,000 years old? Bethel chuckled, his gaze lovingly on little K, then he thought of something and teased, of course, if you count the years you were in slumber, then indeed you are no longer a child. The matter of the old denizens was no secret to Bethel. Little K faltered for a moment. Although he felt he was no longer a child, he genuinely didn't consider himself a several thousand-year-old geezer. After all, those several thousand years of slumber truly felt like the blink of an eye to little K, completely lacking any real sensation. If it weren't for all the evidence indicating that he had indeed slept for several millennia, little K would even think it was a joke. So, don't emphasize your age in front of me. 20 years old, that's too young, Bethel said, his expression somewhat emotional. An age of around 20 truly seemed like a mere cub in his eyes. Recalling this, little K came back to his senses and looked at Roland, earnestly saying, Mr. Bethel is a more suitable candidate than me. I hope he can become the Lord of the Mysteries. You're getting somewhere, you can even anticipate my words now. Roland couldn't help but smile and say, since you don't regret it, then there are some things I won't say. However, Roland changed the subject, smiling and saying, Mr. Fool, have you ever considered, if you give up Saphira Castle, where will the Tarot Club meet in the future? Little K was stunned. He really hadn't considered this question. After thinking for a moment, little K said, I can ask Mr. Bethel to borrow the venue. He probably won't refuse. That's true. Roland nodded. Given Bethel's personality and his relationship with little K, he would indeed not refuse to lend Saphira Castle to little K for meetings. While the two were discussing the matter of the Lord of the Mysteries, on the other side, Adam's treatment of the Dark Angel Evil Spirit finally came to an end. Adam finished the treatment, stepped back, and looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit, who had opened his eyes again, saying, You are, after all, just an evil spirit formed from a single obsession. Although you possess some special characteristics due to the Chaos Sea, the essence of your soul is still fragile. I have completed your soul, but I cannot directly make your soul powerful. Your spirit body's strength is probably only comparable to that of an ordinary person now. The strength of souls varies from person to person. The more powerful the existence, the stronger the soul. A stronger soul is less likely to be obliterated, like the celestial worthy and the Lord, who are like centipedes that don't stiffen even after death. Meanwhile, an ordinary person's soul will dissipate directly after death if no measures are taken, making it difficult to regather. This is why higher sequences are more likely to resurrect from their coffins, while ordinary people are difficult to revive after death. That's enough. The Dark Angel Evil Spirit was clearly not surprised by this result. He then seemed to test something, and a trace of the Chaos Sea's aura entanglement around him. How is it? Adam clearly knew what the Dark Angel Evil Spirit was doing and asked directly. I can probably be considered an incarnation of the Chaos Seas will now, of course, a very weak incarnation, unable to mobilize the entire Chaos Sea, only barely able to use a small portion of its power. The Dark Angel Evil Spirit didn't hide anything. The Chaos Sea's aura on him dissipated. However, if any of you want to accommodate the Chaos Sea, with my help, it will probably be easier. The existence of the Dark Angel Evil Spirit was very special. Although he was just an obsession, he had coexisted with the Chaos Sea for too many years, which led to this change. This is enough. Adam nodded, his expression showing neither disappointment nor satisfaction. Roland also leaned over. He had obviously heard the Dark Angel Evil Spirit's words just now, and he was very satisfied, saying, "We were just trying it out. It's great that it can achieve this level. What more could we ask for?" Compared to this, Roland smiled and extended his hand towards the Dark Angel Evil Spirit, saying, "Welcome to the 24,356 family." Roland genuinely didn't care how much power of the Chaos Sea the Dark Angel Evil Spirit could mobilize. After all, he wasn't lacking in combat power. Thinking about it, Roland could even summon the Lord to help. What Roland cared about, always, was the Dark Angel Evil Spirit's work ethic, which was inherited from Saussure. Working 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. The Dark Angel Evil Spirit shook his hand. Although he hadn't surfed the internet for thousands of years, he clearly still guessed the meaning of Roland's numbers. Exactly. Roland nodded very frankly. Chapter 471. The Sun God is indeed terrible at naming things. I probably understand why I was close to sudden death, the Dark Angel Evil Spirit chuckled, then suddenly said, "Fortunately, I am now symbiotic with the Chaos Sea. Although I haven't reached the point where if the Chaos Sea is immortal, I am immortal, at least I won't die suddenly like ordinary people." Hiss, as expected of a single obsession that fell off you. Roland gasped, unable to help but look at Saussure, exclaiming. What a strange way to put it. Saussure shook his head, smiling as he looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit, saying, "He's just joking. Although the work is indeed very busy, if you really want to rest, he won't stop you. This child is very protective. It seems your relationship is truly good," the Dark Angel Evil Spirit chuckled. Of course. Roland nodded as a matter of course, Saussure is a subordinate I painstakingly poached. He then thought of something and looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit, saying, "By the way, do you want to give yourself a new name? You can't just be called Saussure, can you? That would be a duplicate name." A new name, the Dark Angel Evil Spirit looked confused. He then seemed to think for a second before tentatively saying, "Messiah." PFF'd. Roland couldn't help but laugh. He looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit and said, "No, are you really just copying names from ancient texts? As everyone knows, whether it's Adam or Amon, they are all names from myths. And Messiah also comes from myths. Wait, then how did you get your name, Saussure?" Roland turned his head and curiously looked at Saussure. "Perhaps the sun god performed exceptionally well." Saussure joked. "I think so too," Roland nodded thoughtfully. Then he looked at the Dark Angel Evil Spirit and said, "Although I really want to complain, since you've decided, I'll call you Messiah from now on." After resolving the Dark Angel Evil Spirit's name issue, Roland then said, "Since the Dark Angel, Messiah's problem is solved, next I'm going to hold a funeral for the God of War. Does anyone want to attend?" As the saying goes, since they were already there, although Roland had entrusted the funeral matters to Colin Iliad, since he was also here, he didn't mind getting involved. After all, the God of War was the first sequence 0 he killed, which was quite memorable. "Me. I'll attend." Xiao Amon was the first to raise his hand. He was always the most enthusiastic when it came to joining in the fun. "I'll also attend." Little K also nodded. Although he wasn't familiar with the God of War, it didn't prevent him from attending the other party's funeral. Jack naturally advanced and retreated with his two little companions. The three little ones responded very enthusiastically, and the others also clearly adhered to the principle of, "Since we're already here," and decided to attend the God of War's funeral. Even Messiah, who had just gained a new life, decided to join in the fun. So, in this already dilapidated giant king's court, the God of War was solemnly buried under the gaze of a crowd, becoming another giant buried here after the giant king. After the God of War's funeral, everyone dispersed. The true creator went back to continue growing mushrooms. He had recently been helping with this, and also took the profane slate with him. This slate, which is closely related to the Chaos Sea, would be kept by him for now. Among the others, Adam routinely melted into the air, and no one knew when he would reappear from a corner. Amon, after suddenly ambushing Xiao Amon with a sack and beating him up with lightning speed, fled. Saussure took Messiah back to the Republic to work. Roland, taking Little K and others, went to Backland to find Bethel, who was currently grading test papers at the Abraham family's residence. At that time, Bethel was grading test papers at a flying speed. These test papers were not all from the younger generation of the Abraham family. In fact, they also included test papers from young people who had joined the Beander preparatory class after passing the assessment recently. The Republic naturally also needed its own Beander team. Although it was fun to exploit the church, after all, that belonged to the church, and their loyalty was questionable. Therefore, the Republic specially set up a preparatory class for cultivating Beyonders. Excellent young people from every school would have the qualification to join the preparatory class after being inquired and assessed. Joining the preparatory class did not necessarily mean one would become a Beander, but at least they would learn relevant knowledge. If a preparatory class member performed excellently and had a strong desire, they could participate in the next step of the test after adulthood. If they passed, they could join the Republic's Nightwatcher. This legion naturally corresponds to the Church's Beander teams, such as the Nighthawks and the Punishers. And because Roland's miraculous rule ability can temporarily grant others Beander abilities within the scope of the rule's effect, members of the Legion do not necessarily have to become Beyonders, they can also choose to only borrow the abilities granted by the rule. Although this way they can at most reach the Sequence 8 level, in many cases it is actually sufficient. The Church's grassroots Beyonders are basically only at this level. Those who can reach Sequence 7 are already Captain level and often serve as the person in charge of a certain area. And those who are unwilling to join the Nightwatcher, or who fail the test, as long as they are not too bad, will also be recommended to work in departments related to Beyonders, such as logistics personnel of the Legion, or certain departments that indirectly contact Beyonders but do not directly face danger. If someone is unwilling to participate in any of these, they are free to leave. As long as they don't break the law, the preparatory class will not restrict them. As for why it's young people, of course, it's because older people are no longer suitable to become Beyonders. Of course, if there are indeed some older but very excellent individuals, the preparatory class will also admit them at its discretion. Although the preparatory class mainly selects prospective members from schools for young people, it is not completely oblivious to vocational colleges. Bethel was recently responsible for this aspect, as the Door Pathway's ability is very convenient, allowing him to travel all over the country. Why did you all suddenly come over? Bethel asked. Although he hadn't lifted his head, he had clearly sensed someone's arrival. Came to see you, and also to see if there are any good prospects in the preparatory class recently, Roland said with a smile. He unceremoniously leaned over and glanced at the test papers Bethel was grading, then suddenly raised an eyebrow. Because Roland saw a familiar name, Melissa Moretti. Little K naturally also noticed this name, and his gaze immediately became focused, showing concern for his sister's situation. What's wrong? Bethel looked at him with some confusion. Nothing, just saw an acquaintance, Roland chuckled, and casually asked, so, how are this girl's grades? Very good, Melissa Moretti has excellent talent in mechanics and high morals. Bethel clearly knew who Roland was talking about. He praised Melissa, and finally said, barring any surprises, she should join the Nightwatcher. Little K pursed his lips upon hearing this. As a family member, he certainly wouldn't want Melissa to be in danger, but as an older brother, Little K respected Melissa's own wishes more. Chapter 472, Bethel's eyes on Roland. Very worried. Roland naturally noticed Little K's mood, raised his eyebrows, and asked. Little K did not hide it, nodding frankly, and said, I was once a Nighthawks, so I know very well what it means to become a Nighthawks, but I respect Melissa's choice. Although Nighthawks is not equivalent to Nightwatcher, the two are obviously very similar. And the existence of Nighthawks, while admirable, also means they are constantly treading on the edge of danger. Understandable. Roland nodded, then smiled, and said, however, Nightwatcher are probably safer than you imagine. Compared to the Church, we won't lack basic Beyonders. More manpower itself means increased safety when dealing with Beander incidents. Moreover, Nightwatcher will have a special department dedicated to putting out fires everywhere, and that department will not lack travelers. This is enough to ensure that when local Beander teams encounter problems they cannot handle, they can call for help with one click. Speaking of this, Roland paused, and said in a teasing tone. Speaking of which, I have to thank Rosal for his efforts during this period. Now, with him as the core, a new communication system is gradually being established and will probably be popularized throughout the Republic soon. That sounds great. Little K let out a breath and couldn't help but smile. With enough manpower, convenient communication, and direct support from travelers, it is indeed possible to greatly improve safety. Putting aside other things, if Nightwatcher encountered an incident like 008, they could completely call for a big shot for support with one click before the true creator's descendant arrived. This is an advantage other churches do not have. After all, other pathways that want to provide quick assistance really cannot do it as fast as the door pathway. Bethel, who was listening in, naturally understood what was going on. He smiled and said to Little K, "Do you need me to prepare an amulet for her? Although I'm not entirely clear about her relationship with you, I think she must be very important to you." Bethel was not aware of the Moretti family's affairs, as Little K never wanted the Moretti family to be too involved in Beander incidents, which meant danger, so he rarely mentioned his family in front of Bethel's people. "Thank you, Mr. Bethel." Little K quickly expressed his gratitude. Although a bit embarrassed, he did not refuse the other party's kindness. After all, no matter how safe the Nightwatcher are, they are still fighting on the front lines against danger, so it is necessary to be prepared for anything. "No need to be so polite with me, you are half my student," Bethel said with a gentle smile. He then looked at Roland and said, "I think your sudden visit to me is probably not just for these excellent young people." Roland heard this and smiled. He put down the test paper he had just picked up and flipped through, and said very frankly, "I'm here to solve the last problem on you." Bethel was startled, then realized something. His expression became serious, and he said in a tone that was hard to tell if it was teasing or feelings, "I thought it would take a long time." "You're saying you don't trust my efficiency?" Roland said with a smile, then continued, "Of course, besides solving that fuzzy little problem on you, I'm also going to talk to you about the Lord of the Mysteries." Bethel, Roland's expression also became serious. He looked at Bethel and said, "I may not be able to help you too much in becoming the Lord of the Mysteries." Bethel was clearly not surprised by this, nor was he regretful. He nodded and smiled, saying, "I know, but it's nothing. Some things are meant for me to face. I believe in myself, and I hope you can believe in me, Your Majesty." Roland pursed his lips. He suddenly said, "Adam also told me the same thing. He told me to believe in you, to believe that you can become the Lord of the Mysteries, to believe that even without my help, you can defeat Celestial Worthy. It seems he truly understands you better than I do. You're just too worried, Your Majesty. I know that although you are very indifferent to all beings, you are actually very soft-hearted towards the people you care about. You truly possess too little, so you are unwilling to lose any existence you value. You are afraid that I cannot defeat Celestial Worthy, and you are afraid that I will perish." Bethel sighed at this point. He looked at Roland seriously and said, "But don't be afraid, Your Majesty, even if I really lose to Celestial Worthy, my past self can still accompany you. You won't lose me, you won't lose anyone. You possess such power, you can keep all the existences you care about." The past here naturally refers to the past Bethel. If Rosal heard that, he'd definitely scold you for putting an 18-layer filter on me. Roland said suddenly with a slightly teasing tone after a few seconds of silence. "But I haven't exaggerated. I'm just stating Your Majesty as I see him." Bethel said with a smile, his attitude very frank. "Your next sentence isn't going to be, Your Majesty is also a child, is it?" Roland couldn't help but retort, then laughed, saying, "Unfortunately, I haven't been a child for a long time. I don't think Your Majesty is a child." Bethel shook his head, looked at Roland, and smiled. "After all, you always want to be everyone's father." Isn't that a very normal thing?" Roland smiled as a matter of course, then suddenly said, "But on second thought, you're right, I do have the ability to keep everyone. But it's probably a bit different from what you think." Roland suddenly reached out to Bethel and said, "Give me your hand." Bethel raised his eyebrows, but still extended his hand. Roland grabbed his hand and drew a few symbols in his palm. Subsequently, an invisible force enveloped Bethel. At that moment, Bethel seemed to see layers of shadows lingering in the long river of time, and one of the shadows suddenly solidified. That was his previous second. The illusory image disappeared. Bethel came back to his senses, looked at Roland, and asked tentatively, "What kind of power is this?" "Memory of time, my ability." Roland did not hide it, explaining with a smile, "You can understand it as the reset ability of the fate pathway. It will record your state just now, and when needed in the future, I can reset you back, even if the future you dies or collapses into a monster. Memory of time cannot take effect on Old One level existences, but Bethel is not yet an Old One, so this power can take effect on him, even if he advances to Lord of the Mysteries in the future. This can almost be considered a bug-like behavior, but it is indeed useful. Very magical, you always seem to have no shortage of these magical powers." Bethel couldn't help but exclaim, then suddenly thought of something else, paused, and then said with some hesitation, "But why not record it after the fuzzy problem on me is resolved?" Chapter 473 Mr. Door advances to Sequence 0. Roland blinked, then said very frankly, "I forgot." Bethel was somewhat exasperated, but ultimately said nothing more, only, "So when will you resolve the fuzzy little problem on me?" "If you have no problem, you can do it now," Roland said with a smile. "Then please give me some time to finish these test papers," Bethel said with a smile. He was clearly a very responsible person, so he wouldn't run off to do something else halfway through grading papers. "All right." Roland nodded, then thought of something and asked, "Need any help?" "If you're willing," Bethel did not refuse. By the time the test papers were graded, it was already late, so Roland didn't rush to perform the operation on Bethel. Instead, he let the other party rest for a night to adjust his state. Roland himself also chose to have a good night's sleep to adjust his state to the best. The next morning, after breakfast, Roland and Bethel went to the familiar anomalous space together. Because Rosal was with them. The main reason for calling Rosal was to prevent any accidents during the treatment process. After all, as a Sequence 0 and a former patient, Rosal could both stop Bethel in time if he went mad and serve as a guinea pig to provide some reference. So the operation proceeded smoothly under these circumstances. When Bethel awoke from his coma, the corruption on him had become harmless, just like Rosal's. "Brother, how do you feel now?" Rosal leaned in front of Bethel, waved his hand in front of his eyes, and after the other party's gaze followed, he pointed to Roland next to him and asked, "Do you feel a sense of fear when you see this face now?" Bethel probably hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's all right, there's some instinctive fear, but it's very slight and can be suppressed by reason." "Is this how patients are treated? It's really different from guinea pig no." Rosal said with an exaggerated gasp. Roland glanced at him and said grumpily, "Don't you have any idea why you're guinea pig no? If you weren't so rotten, didn't engage in colonial rule, and didn't do all those messed up things, with the technological progress you guided, you wouldn't have been reduced to guinea pig number 1 by me." Rosal chuckled, not refuting anything. After all, he really wasn't a good person, never had been. Roland ignored him, looked at Bethel, and his tone was unusually tinged with concern. "No problem." "No, I feel very good now," Bethel smiled, then his expression became serious and he said, "So I have decided to advance to Sequence 0 now." "So urgent?" Roland raised an eyebrow, though it wasn't too surprising. This world doesn't have much time left. "Advancing earlier is good for everyone," Bethel exhaled and said. "All right, I respect your wishes." Roland nodded. He had always deeply respected his friend's choices. So on this day, all the doors in the world had a strange reaction at a certain moment, which was the resonance brought by the birth of a true god of the door pathway. Forsaken land of the gods, at true creator's place. Amon, who was observing the profane slate with Third Daddy's deliberate laxity, suddenly looked up in a certain direction. As in King of Angels of the Marauder pathway, he could naturally sense the birth of door. Amon's main body raised his hand and pushed the monocle on his face. His expression was slightly complex, but without much regret. He knew that since Bethel had taken this step, he probably really had no chance. But firstly, Amon might not be convinced by others, but he respected Bethel, his old colleague. Secondly, Amon had known for a long time that he could not become Lord of the Mysteries, so he accepted the situation well now. "This is good too," Amon suddenly smiled, his smile carrying a sense of relief, and he prepared to continue studying the profane slate. The true creator, who had been quietly staying in the shadows, suddenly spoke at this moment. If you had possessed humanity like this before, perhaps that position would have belonged to you. Spare me, I can't bear such responsibility, not even the current me. Amon's main body shook his head and said, don't have too high expectations of me. I am not a good person like you, true creator, after all. The true creator seemed to sigh. After a few seconds of silence, he suddenly said, isn't it third daddy? Amon's main body paused before saying, I'll deal with that guy sooner or later. This naturally referred to little K. The true creator smiled upon hearing this and said, but isn't he also you? Amon's main body did not refute and continued to study the profane slate. The true creator, seemingly pleased, quietly returned to the shadows to grow mushrooms. Tisk. Bethel has advanced too. On a certain battlefield in Intis, Medici, who was commanding the rebel army, obviously sensed something as well. He clicked his tongue, somewhat displeased, but not directed at Bethel's advancement, but at his own continued status as an king of angels. Fortunately, he would be soon. Medici thought of this, and the corners of his mouth curved into a wanton smile. During this period, with his and the Republic's help, the rebel armies in various countries had advanced smoothly. Soon, this revolution sweeping the North and South continent would come to an end. By then, Medici would naturally have completed the ritual to advance to Sequence 0. As for the Sequence 1 Conqueror trait that Medici lacked, Medici had not been idle during this period in Intis besides commanding battles. Soon, Medici would be able to get the Conqueror trait from the Mirror World. And the other Conqueror trait, Primordial Demoness, Medici narrowed his eyes, thinking of the intelligence recently sent by William I. That one hasn't been too honest lately. Perhaps he should make some preparations in advance. Mr. Bethel, have you advanced to Sequence 0? When Bethel and Roland returned to the Abraham encampment, Klein, who had been waiting there, immediately came forward and asked with some anticipation. As the owner of Saphira Castle, he actually had some sense of what had just happened. Yes, it went smoothly. Bethel smiled and nodded, then he probably hesitated for a moment before saying, if you are willing, I will try to initially integrate with Saphira Castle for a period of time. Although Bethel had not yet obtained the full uniqueness and Sequence 1 characteristics of Error, nor the full uniqueness and Sequence 1 characteristics of the Fool, just as Klein in the original work had initially become the master of Saphira Castle at Sequence 2, Bethel could naturally also try to initially accommodate Saphira Castle after becoming Sequence 0. Of course I'm willing. Klein quickly nodded, without a second of hesitation, saying, if there's anything I can help with, Mr. Bethel, just say the word. Chapter 474, The Primordial Demoness's Actions. I will. Bethel didn't stand on ceremony with little K. He continued, although I will accommodate Saphira Castle, even if I truly become the Lord of the Mysteries, you can still use it. This is your rightful privilege. Little K was stunned for a moment, unable to speak. He couldn't help but laugh, and after several seconds, he said, I was going to ask Mr. Bethel to borrow Saphira Castle for the Tarot Club, but I didn't expect Mr. Bethel to say it first, and so, generous. Aren't you the more generous one? Bethel chuckled and retorted. Then, as if remembering something, he said with emotion, I once thought about how I would obtain Saphira Castle. In my original imagination, it might have been a thrilling struggle, but I didn't expect. Bethel paused here, looked at little K, and then continued, you are truly good, little K. Not everyone can give up power within reach like you. If it were Amon, we would probably be fighting to the death by now. I just don't crave these things, Mr. Bethel. You are the good person. Little K shook his head, a little embarrassed. To be fair, yes, the main body is such a marauder, little Amon agreed with Bethel's words. While they were praising each other and dissing Amon, Roland was calculating what he needed to focus on in the coming period. Aside from Roland's own advancement, he first needed to focus on Medici's promotion to Sequence 0. Considering the existence of the Primordial Demoness, Roland felt it was necessary to pay close attention to that side in the coming period, so that if the Primordial Demoness made any moves, he could promptly extinguish them. Secondly, there was Bethel's promotion to Lord of the Mysteries. Roland couldn't help much with this, but he still had to pay attention to ensure he could rewind in case of an accident. Lastly, there was the sun god's resurrection. Roland already had full confidence in this aspect and would proceed with it as soon as he advanced to sequence 2, narrator. And once I advance to chaos, the sun god is resurrected, and Bethel also advances to Lord of the Mysteries, we can consider the decisive battle with the outer gods. Roland felt a slight excitement at this thought. He inherently possessed a strong desire for control, and thus had long been displeased with the outer gods lurking outside Earth. Resolving those guys sooner would be a good thing for everyone. So this is your reason for coming here to freeload? Medici spoke irritably. He looked at Roland, who was holding a skewer in his left hand and burning red flames in his right, clearly making skewers on the spot. You have to believe me, I really came to protect you, Roland said with a sincere expression, but his gaze remained fixed on the skewers in Medici's hand. If you hadn't ordered food as soon as you arrived, I would have believed you. Medici rolled his eyes, then picked up the nearby seasoning box and asked skillfully, medium spicy. Yes. Roland nodded, then said as if it were obvious, but the roasted meat made with your fire is really delicious. It has a sense of disaster, very unique. HMPH. Medici snorted, casually tossing the seasoned roasted meat to Roland, then picked up a tissue to wipe his hands before saying, the primordial demoness has indeed been making some moves recently. She seems to be trying to contact that long-dormant dark side of the universe, perhaps wanting to join forces with her. Farbati. Roland's expression became a bit subtle. He took a bite of the roasted meat, swallowed it, and then said, then she's quite good at picking people, huh? Farbati, the dark side of the universe, is a true god of the demon pathway, symbolizing disaster in everyone's eyes, a deity followed by many demons, even considered by her followers to be the ruler of the abyss, a destroyer who will inevitably devour the entire world. From this perspective, the primordial demoness's choice seems to have no problem. After all, anyone with normal intelligence could roughly infer the stance of Roland and others through the recent actions of the Republic. In this situation, choosing the dark side of the universe, who stands in opposition to order, is perfectly fine. The only problem is that besides being a true god of the demon pathway and an ancient god who survived until the second epoch, Farbati has another identity. Farbati is also a remnant of the old days and has been preparing to resist the apocalypse. She did indeed do many wrong things and committed many crimes, but in the original work, this demon lord also heavily injured an outer god at the cost of her life. It can be said that Farbati is completely different from the primordial demoness, who is a crazy woman trying to drag the whole world to its death. What, you know her? Medici naturally heard the teasing in Roland's tone and couldn't help but ask. Not exactly, I just know a little about her situation, Roland shook his head. His attitude towards an existence like Farbati was similar to his attitude towards Rosal. He couldn't possibly like her, but he didn't dislike her either. In any case, anyone willing to sacrifice themselves to save the world still falls within the realm of redeemable, in Roland's eyes. Perhaps I can save her. I remember Farbati seemed to be corrupted by the mother tree, Roland fell into thought. Medici glanced at him, didn't interrupt, and began to handle some military affairs. Roland's arrival didn't cause much change in Medici's life. He continued to push the front lines steadily, liberating cities one by one, while also guarding against the primordial demoness's actions. Aside from freeloading daily, Roland occasionally helped process some documents and continued to compile Medici's past stories, striving to let everyone understand what kind of beautiful, tragic, and strong person Medici was. By the time Medici occasionally noticed the mix of worship and pity in the eyes of the military doctors from the medical department, the Republic had already produced a large number of Mama fans for the War Angel. That's enough. Medici slammed the table, interrupting the person who was writing furiously, and said irritably, what on earth are you making up? Roughly, a non-human father, a seriously ill mother, a mentally challenged younger brother, and a broken you. Roland blinked, speaking unhurriedly. Medici took a deep breath and said through gritted teeth, what is wrong with you? Ahem, isn't the beautiful, tragic, strong character setting more easily accepted? And to be honest, your real experience isn't much different from this. I just did a little embellishment. Roland became more and more self-righteous as he spoke, saying eloquently. Your father really isn't human, and your mother is crazy, so how can she not be considered seriously ill? So the mentally challenged younger brother refers to the Great Serpent. Does he know you're slandering him like this? Medici was almost amused by his anger, and said irritably. Chapter 475, The Witch's Love. I asked, and Ouroboros said it was fine. Roland had indeed asked Ouroboros this question, so he spoke with great confidence. As for whether fabricating Medici's false past under such circumstances, with an existing prototype, would affect the ritual's effectiveness, it wouldn't. The ritual's requirements weren't that high, it was fine as long as most of the past was fictional. Medici was clearly speechless, momentarily unsure what to say. After a few seconds, he took a deep breath, calmed himself, and then asked, are the ritual requirements met? Some things others didn't know, but Medici was very clear about them. After all, he was one of Roland's closest acquaintances. Almost. Roland nodded, smiling. Actually, during this time, my Sequence 3 potion is almost fully digested. Next, as long as you advance to Red Priest, I can advance to Fictionalizer. At that time, I can resurrect your father. Not bad. Medici hooked his lips, clearly also looking forward to it. No matter what, the sun god was a very important existence to him, and he naturally looked forward to his resurrection. So, when are you advancing to Sequence 0? Roland asked with a smile. That depends on when the primordial demoness makes her move. Medici said, glancing at Roland, you should know more about this than I do. Don't tell me you haven't done anything during this time except make up my little stories. As expected, I can't hide anything from you. Roland chuckled, with no intention of concealing anything. His expression was meaningful as he said, the primordial demoness did contact Farbati and proposed an alliance. Farbati initially wanted to refuse, but she eventually changed her mind. Because you contacted him. Medici said this with great certainty. Others might find it difficult to contact Farbati, but Roland was different, he had too many ways to contact this demon lord. I just think he still has a chance. Roland didn't deny it, smiling as he spoke, so I decided to give him a chance to save himself. If he can help us take down the primordial demoness, I'll help him out. It seems that Demon Lord isn't entirely a bad person in your eyes. Medici glanced at Roland, knowing Roland's values very well, he hooked his lips and asked, so, which day is it? Soon, within 7 days. Roland said with a smile, if nothing unexpected happens, 7 days from now you'll be fighting your way into Intis's capital, and that's when they'll make their move. HMPH, as expected. Medici sneered, but a raging flame seemed to ignite in his ruby-like eyes. He naturally also yearned to kill the primordial demoness. This was due to their long-standing enmity, and also a desire from the pathway itself. Similar sequences, if not in love, must be in conflict. The war progressed even more smoothly in the following days, and the counter-attacking forces from the Intis side seemed to have weakened. In fact, not only Intis, but the resistance forces in various countries also seemed to have weakened, although the rebel armies in various places advanced their front lines much more smoothly for a time. But both Roland and Medici were well aware that this was merely a facade. In essence, these people had already cooperated with the primordial demoness, intending to concentrate their forces to deliver a severe blow to Medici. They might not be unaware that killing Medici might not change the current situation, but these people, who would rather die than give up power, still wanted to drag Medici to hell, even knowing it was futile. This was their last resistance, and their final struggle. Roland and Medici were well aware of this and accepted it gladly. For them, eliminating these stubborn resistance elements in one go was much better than having them strategically retreat and occasionally pop up to cause trouble later. After all, even Roland couldn't monitor the entire world before the rules were established. If the other party truly intended to hide, he really couldn't find and eliminate all of them. Time passed under these circumstances, and soon the 7th day arrived. On this day, led by Medici, the rebel army finally reached the capital of Intis. And on this day, as the rebel army approached the city, many people who had previously disappeared from the battlefield suddenly appeared en masse in the Intis camp. Things have come to this point, so stop hiding and holding back. Use whatever moves you have, otherwise, after today, you probably won't have another chance. Medici looked down at the demigods opposite him, his tone as sarcastic as ever. He then raised a hand to cover his mouth and nose with a slight look of disgust, saying, "To be honest, your stench is even reaching me, which. So many years have passed, and your words are still so unpleasant. No wonder you were the first hunter to die back then." A female voice rang out at this moment. Accompanied by changes in space, Medici felt a pulling sensation. He raised an eyebrow, did not resist, and while petting a cat, was pulled into the mirror world. And as Medici disappeared, Amon's figure appeared synchronously. He looked at the demigods not far away and said with a smile, "Gentlemen, Medici has his own matters to attend to. How about I accompany you for a while instead?" Upon entering the mirror world, Medici first saw a graceful figure. The primordial demoness, beautiful in both appearance and every other aspect, smiled at him and said with what seemed like emotion, "But it's precisely someone like you who is so lucky that I." The primordial demoness paused there and didn't continue, but another voice sounded behind Medici. "Making me jealous, so jealous that I wish I could kill you immediately. Why is it you who was resurrected? Why did you accommodate the uniqueness of the Red Priest? You don't deserve to accommodate his things." Medici raised an eyebrow, not at all surprised by this. He, of course, knew who the other voice was. It was the primordial demoness in the mirror. Medici merely hooked his lips, his smile unrestrained and flamboyant, saying, "Then you can continue to be jealous. Anyway, no matter how much more jealous you get, this luck won't belong to your beloved." Medici seemed to hesitate here before uttering the name, Tutor. Ha 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 ha. He suddenly burst into laughter, laughing until he was out of breath. After he finished laughing, Medici said, "You love him, how ridiculous. You love him yet you personally killed him. You love him yet you destroyed all his other means of resurrection, making it so he can only be reborn through you. This is truly too funny, you call this love." The primordial demoness's expression turned cold. She gazed at Medici, then suddenly smiled enchantingly and said, "How could you understand? Someone like you, who has no love, how could you understand that to love someone is to devour their flesh and blood, to imprison their body, to make them never leave you for their entire life, to make them coexist and co-live with you for all eternity? This is love, this is love." For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.